Hi, I'm Davina. At my award ceremony, the biggest night of my life, my parents didn't show up. They just left a note on the kitchen counter. Just a trophy. That night, something inside me broke. But what followed shattered so much more. Secrets, betrayals, a lifetime of sacrifices nobody ever asked for, but always expected. What happens when the daughter they took for granted finally walks away and cancels everything they counted on? You think the note was bad? Trust me, it was just the beginning. The door creaked open into a house that felt colder than the night outside. I stepped in, the polished wooden floor muffling my steps. The award plaque felt heavier in my hand with every breath I took. Faint traces of spring clung to the air, cut grass, damp earth. But inside, it was just silence. No balloons, no cheers, not even a half-hearted good job echoing from upstairs. I shut the door softly behind me and paused, listening for any hint of life. Nothing. The house, so familiar, suddenly felt foreign. I walked into the kitchen, where the counter was cluttered with yesterday's mail and an empty cereal bowl, abandoned like an afterthought. That's when I saw it. A crumpled scrap of paper lying in the center of the counter, weighed down by a half-empty salt shaker. I moved closer, my heart thrumming in my chest for reasons I couldn't name yet. Scrawled across it in quick, lazy handwriting were 3 words: just a trophy. I froze. For a full minute, maybe longer, I stood there, staring at it like it might change if I blinked hard enough. The plaque, still clutched in my hand, pressed against my ribs. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until the edges of my vision tightened. No decorations, no card, no, "We're proud of you." Just that note. 3 words that gutted me deeper than 1,000 insults ever could. I set the plaque down carefully on the counter next to the note. It made a small, hollow sound against the laminate, a sound that seemed too loud in the heavy silence. I straightened, looking around as if expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Surprise!" But there was only the steady tick of the kitchen clock, indifferent to the small disaster it was witnessing. Maybe they forgot. Maybe something happened. An emergency? Maybe. I knew better. I had always known better. For a moment, I tried to conjure a reason, any reason, why my own family wouldn't be here to celebrate one of the biggest achievements of my life. I thought about when I won the regional spelling bee in middle school, how they left a note taped to the fridge. Dinner in the oven. No, congratulations. No, we're proud of you. I thought about my high school art exhibit. The way Mom said, maybe next time they'll pick a real artist, when I showed her the invitation. I thought about the scholarships, the internships, the nights I stayed up crying into my pillow because I had nobody to share my victories with. Not really. They always made sure I knew. My accomplishments were inconvenient, my successes invisible, unless they could brag about them to their friends. Tonight wasn't new. It was just the first time I couldn't lie to myself about it anymore. My phone buzzed against my hip, breaking my spiral of thought. I pulled it out, the screen lighting up with a notification from my university. Congratulations to all our graduates and award recipients. Celebrate this important milestone with the people who love and support you. I laughed, a hollow, humorless sound that scraped my throat raw. It sounded so ridiculous, so naive. The people who love and support you. I didn't even bother opening the email fully. I locked the screen and shoved the phone back into my pocket, feeling the weight of it like another anchor dragging me down. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water, my hands shaking just enough to slosh a little over the rim. I drank it down quickly, trying to wash away the bitter taste crawling up my throat. The kitchen clock ticked on, oblivious. I turned off the light and made my way down the hallway to my bedroom, the award plaque still tucked awkwardly under my arm. The house was dim, bathed in the fading lavender light of early evening. Every step I took felt heavier, more permanent, like I was walking away from something I couldn't name yet. I paused at my bedroom door, glancing back one last time. The living room sat dark and empty. The kitchen counter gleamed under the faint light from the street lamp outside, casting a ghostly glow over the crumpled note. Just a trophy. The words echoed in my head as I pushed open my door and stepped inside. I set the plaque down on my desk carefully, almost reverently, like it deserved the respect nobody else had bothered to give it. My fingers lingered on the smooth wood of the frame. I sat down heavily on the edge of my bed, the mattress sighing under my weight. I stared at the plaque for a long time, trying to find meaning where there was none. The ache in my chest wasn't sharp, it was slow, corrosive, a steady unraveling of something I hadn't even realized was still holding me together. I used to believe family would notice eventually, I whispered to the empty room. That night, something inside me cracked wide open. The night stretched on, heavy and unyielding. I lay back on my bed, the ceiling above me fading into shadow. For a long moment, I just stared, letting the silence settle into my bones. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once. Then the world went still again. The award plaque sat untouched on my desk, its presence almost accusing. I closed my eyes, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. Instead, another memory crept in. One I hadn't invited, but one that came anyway, the way old wounds always do when you're already bleeding. A week ago, the backyard had pulsed with life, music thudding against the walls like a heartbeat I wasn't allowed to join. I remembered lying in bed, the bass so loud it rattled the glass of my window. The lights strung from the trees outside had cast glowing webs across the lawn. Wesley's party. It wasn't just any party, it was a spectacle. Food trucks lined the curb, their neon signs flashing like beacons. A DJ spun tracks from a booth set up on the patio. A drone buzzed overhead, capturing every smiling face, every drunken cheer. People I didn't even recognize streamed in and out of our house, laughing, hugging, congratulating. Through the sheer curtains of my bedroom window, I watched Mom, Dorothy, flutter around like a hostess at a celebrity gala, a tray of custom cupcakes balanced expertly in her manicured hands. Each cupcake was topped with a miniature fondant version of Wesley's face, complete with his cocky smirk. Dad manned the grill like it was the 4th of July, flipping burgers and ribs with theatrical flair, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't that funny. Guests toasted Wesley, patted him on the back, snapped selfies with him as if being near him would somehow transfer his good fortune onto them. And me? I wasn't invited. I wasn't even acknowledged. I sat at my desk, pretending to work, pretending not to hear the music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, pretending it didn't matter. It wasn't the first time. Growing up, Wesley was the sun, and I was just a planet forced to orbit him, unnoticed. Every birthday of his was an event, a blowout party, banners hung across the living room, gifts piled high. For mine, if they remembered, it was a leftover cake from the grocery store and a distracted, happy birthday over breakfast. When Wesley barely passed his finals in high school, there was a dinner out, complete with a custom-made cake shaped like a graduation cap. When I graduated summa cum laude from university, Mom said, "That's nice, honey," without even looking up from her phone. As a child, I learned quickly that asking for attention was a sin. If I asked for help with homework, I was being difficult. If I asked for space to paint, to write, to breathe, I was starting drama. Wesley always needed the room to revolve around him, and it always did. The more I tried to matter, the more invisible I became. Lying there in the dark, the echoes of Wesley's party still vivid in my mind, I felt the old hurt twisting itself tighter around my ribs. They had celebrated him like he won the Nobel Prize. They left me a crumpled note and an empty house. Earlier today, if I could even call it that, it already felt like a lifetime ago. I'd found the courage to ask Mom, standing there in the kitchen after my ceremony, clutching my plaque like a lifeline. "Did no one want to do anything for me?" I'd asked, voice carefully neutral, like I wasn't begging for something as simple as being seen. She hadn't even looked up from sorting the mail. Without missing a beat, Dorothy said, "You're not really the celebrating type, are you?" As if that was a compliment. As if her indifference was an act of mercy. I remembered standing there feeling like an idiot, feeling like a child again, foolish for needing anything at all. Her words stung not because they were sharp, but because they were so thoughtless, so casual, like my existence didn't warrant more than a shrug. I turned onto my side, the bedsheets cool against my skin. The plaque on the desk gleamed dully in the faint light spilling in from the street lamp outside. I should have known. I did know. But there's a difference between knowing something in your head and feeling it crack open in your chest. I thought about every time I had clapped for Wesley, cheered for his games, celebrated his smallest victories even when he didn't notice. I thought about all the times I sat quietly with my own wins, waiting for someone to care, and when no one did, telling myself it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. The clock on my nightstand blinked 1:17 a.m. in cold blue digits. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, even though it wasn't cold. Sleep wouldn't come. It never did when the ache got this loud. For a long time I lay there, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling, my mind racing through years of neglect disguised as giving me space. And in that restless silence, something inside me hardened. They were never going to celebrate me. They were never going to see me. Not really. Because to them, I was never the reason to celebrate. I was the background noise, the shadow that made Wesley shine brighter. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the tears not to fall. I was done crying for people who never cried for me. That was the night I decided silence wasn't grace. It was erasure. And I was done being erased. The clock blinked 2:04 a.m. when I finally sat up. My room smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I never lit, a mockery of calm. I pressed my bare feet onto the cool floor and let my hands rest in my lap for a moment, breathing in the weight of everything I could no longer carry. No one was coming to fix it. No apology would be offered. And I was done waiting for one. I moved quietly, careful not to make noise, even though there was no one awake to hear me. The duffel bag I used back when I moved into the dorm sat folded under my bed, a little dusty but serviceable. I pulled it out, shaking it open. The zipper let out a low scrape that sounded too loud in the stillness. I packed methodically. My laptop, charger, and the degree I fought for without a single congratulatory handshake from my parents. The envelope of cash I'd saved from tutoring sessions and late-night shifts at the campus library. Jeans, 2 sweaters, the comfortable sneakers I bought last Black Friday, while everyone else splurged on flat-screen TVs. I left behind anything that felt like a chain. Yearbooks, gifts I never asked for but received anyway, like someone had picked up whatever was nearest to the checkout line. No notes, no farewell, just movement. Downstairs, the house was bathed in dim shadows. I stood at the threshold of the living room for a moment, scanning the furniture, the family photos that lined the mantel. None of them featured me alone. I was background noise there too, wedged into the corners, an afterthought. I adjusted the strap on my shoulder and turned the doorknob slowly, the latch giving way with a reluctant click. Stepping outside, the crisp air wrapped around me like a second skin. A few stars winked through the thinning clouds. The driveway stretched before me, and beyond it, a different life. I paused, one hand resting lightly on the frame of the door. No one stirred upstairs. No silhouettes at the windows. No calls trailing after me, asking where I was going. They wouldn't even know I'd left until morning, if they noticed at all. I closed the door without a sound. The 30-minute drive to the motel felt both impossibly long and brutally short. The roads were mostly empty, the occasional truck humming by in the opposite lane. The radio played low, a classic rock station half lost to static, but I didn't turn it off. It was better than sitting alone with the buzz of my own heartbeat. The motel was one of those places you blink and miss on the highway, a squat one-story building with peeling paint and a neon vacancy sign that flickered weakly against the night. Inside, the clerk barely looked up from his newspaper as I slid my ID across the counter. He handed me a key, an actual metal key, not a plastic card, and mumbled something about free coffee in the morning. I nodded, tucking the key into my jacket pocket. The room was nothing special. Bed, dresser, tiny bathroom. Faded wallpaper peeled slightly at the corners. But when I stepped inside and turned the lock behind me, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. No invisible expectations hanging in the air, no tightrope to walk between being too much and never enough. Just 4 walls, a sagging mattress, and a silence that didn't judge me. I dropped the duffel bag on the bed and sat down beside it. My body ached in ways I hadn't noticed before, from holding it all together, from carrying so much alone. Pulling out my laptop, I flipped it open and created a new document. At the top, I typed the title without hesitation, Everything They Don't Know I Paid For. And then the list began. Wesley's laptop when he spilled soda on it 2 years ago and never told anyone. Dad's overdue Visa bill I paid off in secret so he wouldn't lose his credit line. The water bill Mom forgot about during that rough winter when we almost had the pipes freeze. My own textbooks, my own gas money, the groceries that mysteriously refilled the pantry when someone must have remembered to shop. Line after line poured out of me. Every silent bailout, every invisible act of love they never noticed, or worse, never thought to ask where it came from. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight. It wasn't just the money. It was the emotional math I had been doing for years, calculating what parts of myself to suppress just to keep the peace. And for what? Not a party, not even a hug. Just a note on the counter and a shrug that told me all I needed to know. My hands hovered over the keyboard as a new thought began to crystallize, sharper than any sadness. This wasn't about getting even. It wasn't about making them hurt the way I had been hurt. It was about making sure the weight they so casually placed on my shoulders stayed off for good. Because I was done. Done carrying them, done patching up holes they refused to see, done sacrificing my sanity for scraps of affection. I closed the laptop softly, like tucking in a child. 3 days, I thought. 3 days, and everything they leaned on would vanish. Not because I wanted revenge, but because survival sometimes looks like not catching a falling knife. Morning seeped into the motel room through the thin curtains, painting the faded carpet in stripes of dull light. I hadn't slept much, but I didn't feel tired. It was a different kind of energy humming under my skin, focused, deliberate, the kind you find when you finally realize no one's coming to save you. Sitting at the small wooden desk by the window, I powered up my laptop. It took a few seconds for the screen to flicker to life, but once it did, I wasted no time. My fingers moved with a calmness that felt foreign at first, then natural. One by one, I logged into every account that tethered me to that house. First, the family phone plan. I scrolled down, clicked Manage Lines, and deactivated each one except mine. A warning popped up. Are you sure you want to remove these users? They will lose service immediately. I clicked yes without hesitation. Next, the streaming services. Spotify tied to Wesley's email, Netflix still billed to my card, even the cloud storage account my parents dumped every blurry family photo into. One by one, cancel, cancel, cancel. Then the utilities. I opened the water company portal, the electric company, the garbage disposal service, all still under my name, because at some point it had been easier for me to manage it than to listen to them complain. One click at a time, I dismantled the invisible safety net they never even knew existed. With every confirmation email that pinged into my inbox, a small knot in my chest loosened. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because for the first time, I wasn't going to suffer for them. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the stiff motel chair, staring at the ceiling as if the answers were written there. It was still early, the muggy June air already making the small room feel stuffy. I opened the window slightly, letting in a weak breeze that smelled faintly of asphalt and cut grass. And then, the phone started buzzing. At first, it was just one notification, then another and another. Wesley, bro WTF, where's my Spotify? Wesley again. My phone's dead, man, I need it for work. Mom, Dorothy, sent a longer message. Why is my stylist saying payment failed? Davina, call me now. Another one from Dad. The lights are acting weird. Did you forget to pay again? I watched the messages roll in, a steady stream of panic disguised as accusations. The chaos I'd carried silently for years was now crashing down around them, and they were scrambling, desperate to find the net that had always caught them before they even realized they were falling. But this time, there was no net. Not anymore. Dorothy sent another message, this one laced with a guilt so thick it nearly made me laugh. You're hurting everyone. You always take things so personally. This isn't what family does to each other. It was almost impressive how quickly they shifted from confusion to blame. Not once did anyone ask if I was okay. Not once did anyone say, we're sorry. Instead, It was my fault. For removing support they never thanked me for. It was my fault for letting them feel even a fraction of the insecurity I'd lived with every day. I put the phone down on the desk, letting it buzz unanswered. The next barrage came faster. Wesley, sending nothing but angry emojis. Dad, firing off messages like bullets. Unbelievable, ungrateful. You'll regret this when we're gone. And Dorothy, the master of emotional manipulation, trying every key on the broken piano of our relationship. I didn't mean what I said. You know we love you deep down. You're being selfish after everything we've done for you. Selfish. That word echoed in my mind, bitter and absurd. If survival was selfish, then yes, I was finally guilty. I opened the family group chat just long enough to see the train wreck unfolding. Wesley. Where TF is Davina? Dad. She's punishing us. Typical. Dorothy. Don't engage, she wants attention. I laughed quietly, a sound more disbelief than amusement. They truly believed that cutting the leash they'd tied around my neck was about attention. They didn't see that I wasn't standing in the doorway waiting to be noticed anymore. I was already halfway down the road, and they were arguing with my shadow. Without another glance, I muted the group chat and blocked notifications from their numbers. No arguments, no explanations, no more wasted words on people who only listened when something was missing from their plates. Their chaos wasn't my responsibility anymore. Their hunger wasn't mine to feed. Their darkness wasn't mine to brighten. I glanced around the room again, the peeling wallpaper, the ancient TV perched on a particle board dresser, the thin curtains struggling to block out the rising sun. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't comfortable. But it was mine. As I powered down my phone for the night, I whispered into the stillness, more to myself than to anyone else. They're finally feeling the weight I've been carrying alone for years. And I was just getting started. The next morning, the air inside the motel room was thick, heavy with the kind of humidity that made the walls feel closer than they were. I swung my legs off the bed and rubbed the back of my neck, letting the reality settle into my bones. This was my life now, stripped down, raw, mine to rebuild. The laptop still sat on the nightstand, the screen dark. I reached for it, my fingers steady. There were no doubts clouding my mind anymore. No second guessing. I powered it on, and while it booted, I grabbed a bottle of water from the tiny motel fridge and took a sip, savoring the small luxury of doing something just for myself. When the email notification popped up, I saw it immediately, the subject line bold and almost shining through the gloom. Offer extended academic center manager position. My heart skipped once, twice, then thudded into a new rhythm. I clicked it open. It wasn't just an offer. It was a door, a real door. Full-time, benefits, a salary that wouldn't leave me scraping by, and my own office at the new center they were opening 2 towns over. They wanted me, not as a backup, not as a favor, not because it was convenient. They saw what I had built with my students, the quiet success I had nurtured in a place no one else cared to look. For a moment I just stared at the screen, letting the reality of it wash over me. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to ask permission. All I had to do was say yes. I hit reply without a second thought. Thank you for the opportunity. I accept the offer with enthusiasm and look forward to contributing to the success of the new center. Click, send. The heaviness on my chest lifted just a fraction. Not enough to fly, but enough to breathe a little easier. By noon, I had packed up what little I had brought to the motel. I booked a short-term rental closer to the center, a modest 1-bedroom apartment with peeling linoleum floors and a tiny kitchen. It wasn't fancy, but it was a start. It was enough. I loaded my duffel bag into the back of a rideshare, exchanging polite small talk with the driver, while my mind spun plans like threads. Furniture to buy, utilities to set up, routes to memorize. Halfway to the new place, my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but local. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? I answered cautiously. No voice answered back, just a click. And then a mechanical voice from the recording. You have received a certified letter. Please check your front desk reception. Confused, I furrowed my brow but thanked the recording anyway. Once I reached the rental office, the front desk clerk handed me a slightly crumpled envelope. No return address. Just my name scrawled in messy handwriting. Dorothy. Of course. Back in the new apartment, surrounded by bare walls and possibility, I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it. The letter was a patchwork of contradictions. Half apology, half blame. Words like, "We didn't mean to hurt you. You've always been independent. You never needed much. We were under a lot of stress. It wasn't personal. Family is about forgiveness. No real ownership, no real regret. Just another attempt to twist the blade a little softer, to reframe the years of neglect as an accident instead of a choice." I let the letter drop to the floor. It didn't deserve to be framed, to be mourned. It was just another brick in the wall they had spent a lifetime building between us. I stood up slowly, letting the ache in my joints remind me how long I had sat still for them. No more. "You can't fix a house built on quicksand," I muttered under my breath, tossing the letter into the small motel trash can. They weren't sorry. They were scared. Scared of losing their scapegoat, their silent labor, their fallback plan. Scared that without me, the cracks in the foundation they ignored for decades would finally split open and swallow them whole. I checked my email again. The confirmation for my lease had arrived. Move-in day was tomorrow. Tonight would be my last night in the motel. Tonight, I closed a chapter they still hadn't realized was over. As the late afternoon sun dipped low, throwing golden streaks across the stained carpet, I packed my bag again, lighter this time, less burdened. Locking the motel door behind me, I slung my duffel over one shoulder and smiled to myself. "They thought they could guilt me back," I whispered. They were wrong. The heavy motel door shut behind me for the last time, and I didn't look back. The sun blazed overhead, pressing down like a dare. I squared my shoulders against it, against all of it, and moved forward, into my new life, into a new place where no one knew my name unless I chose to tell them. The apartment wasn't much. Cracked tile floors, beige walls screaming for a fresh coat of paint, and a faint smell of paint thinner that clung to the air. But it was clean. It was quiet. It was mine. I spent the afternoon unpacking what little I owned. A few worn books, my laptop, a secondhand coffee maker. Piece by piece, I was building a life that no longer required permission. It was almost evening when I plugged my laptop into the wall and logged into my backup email account. I wasn't sure what made me check it. Curiosity maybe, or a premonition. The inbox was flooded. At first I thought it was junk mail, but then I saw the subject lines. "Family is everything. Betrayal cuts deepest. You reap what you sow." I opened one post link hesitantly, and there it was. A public Facebook rant, courtesy of Dorothy. Vague enough not to name me, but sharp enough that anyone with half a brain would know exactly who she meant. "Some people forget where they come from," it read. "They think success means cutting ties with the people who sacrificed everything for them. Shameful." Underneath, comments bloomed like weeds. "Stay strong, Dorothy. She'll regret it one day." "Kids these days are so selfish." Extended family chimed in. Aunts, cousins, neighbors who once handed me Halloween candy and now turned their backs without a second thought. I clicked through more posts. Wesley, too, had taken to Instagram, posting blurry photos of our old backyard with captions like, "Family ain't disposable," and "Some people just ain't built right." The worst part wasn't their words. It was how quickly strangers, people who hadn't lifted a finger for me in years, lapped them up like gospel. I sat back in the creaky chair, the laptop humming quietly on my desk. My chest tightened, not with grief, but with a kind of cold fury I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. They could paint whatever picture they wanted. It didn't make it real. I reached for my water bottle when another notification dinged. A new email, this time sent to my work address. My stomach dropped the second I saw the sender's name. Wesley. I opened it with slow, deliberate fingers. "You better fix this," the email said. "I know where you work." No punctuation, no pleasantries, just a threat, thinly veiled but crystal clear. For a moment, I couldn't move. Not because I was scared. Not exactly. Because I knew what this meant. They weren't just trying to guilt me back anymore. They were choosing war. Slowly, methodically, I forwarded the email to my supervisor, adding a simple note. "Potential security concern. Please advise. I didn't want drama. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to do my job, live my life, and be left alone. But if they were going to bring the fight to my doorstep, I wasn't about to stand there and let them. My supervisor, kind but firm, replied within minutes. We'll increase security measures immediately. Thank you for letting us know. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I wasn't alone here. Not anymore. The next morning, the building manager installed a keypad lock on the staff entrance. Cameras were checked, policies were reviewed. It was subtle but solid, like laying bricks against an incoming storm. I stood by my office window, watching the parking lot shimmer under the summer heat, and realized I wasn't afraid. Not of Wesley, not of Dorothy, not of the lies they were weaving around me like spiderwebs. This wasn't family anymore. This was survival, and survival meant drawing lines, clear, hard, permanent. Inside my chest, something old and heavy cracked loose. Not sadness, not guilt, freedom. Next time they cross the line, I thought, staring at my reflection in the glass, there won't be another warning. I turned from the window, my office door clicking shut behind me. Let them come. I was ready. The sky had darkened to a heavy steel, the air thick and still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I tossed my keys onto the small table by the door and kicked off my shoes, the tile cool against my bare feet. Thunder rumbled low in the distance, not quite here yet, but close enough that the windows rattled faintly in warning. I was just about to heat up leftovers when my phone buzzed violently against the counter. Unknown number. I stared at it for a second, every instinct screaming at me to ignore it. But a deeper instinct, the one honed by years of dealing with them, told me exactly who it was. I answered without a word. Finally, Wesley's voice snarled into my ear. Took you long enough to stop hiding. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us like a taut wire. You're a real piece of work, you know that? He spat. You think you're better than us now? You think you can just walk away like you never owed us anything? I leaned back against the kitchen counter, feeling the cool stone bite into my palms. I could almost see him, pacing, red-faced, wild-eyed, painting himself as the victim in a story he wrote himself. You ruined everything, he barked. Mom's a wreck because of you. You got people looking at us like we're trash. There it was. Not guilt, not regret, just embarrassment, just wounded pride. And then, faint but unmistakable, I heard it. Sobbing. Loud, theatrical, dragging on the edges of his words like background noise. Dorothy. I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me without sinking in. It wasn't real. It was a performance. An old, tired play I'd seen too many times before. Nobody said I'm sorry. Nobody said we hurt you. Just accusations, like knives tossed blindly into the dark. You done yet? I asked, my voice steady, almost bored. There was a pause, like he hadn't expected that. Like he was so used to me folding under the weight of their chaos that he didn't know what to do when I didn't. You're the selfish one, he hissed. You always have been. Everything we did for you. I let out a soft laugh, not bitter, not cruel, just tired. No, I said quietly, you did everything for yourselves, and you used me to clean up the mess. His breath caught on the other end. Good. You didn't lose me, I continued, voice sharpening like the edge of a blade. You pushed me away. You chose yourselves every single time. And now you get to live with that. I took a deep breath, feeling the words settle into my bones like steel. No more money, I said. No more favors. No more pretending. He tried to interrupt. I heard the sputtering outrage, but I cut through it cleanly. And unless you can come to me with real apologies, not crocodile tears, not guilt trips, you get no access to me. None. The storm outside cracked open then, a flash of lightning illuminating my small kitchen for a split second. I didn't flinch, because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the thunder. I wasn't afraid of them. Wesley started shouting again, some mix of curse words and blame and rage. I didn't listen. I ended the call mid-sentence, my thumb steady as I blocked the number. Then I blocked Dorothy. Then every other number tied to that sinking ship I used to call family. It wasn't hate that fueled me. It was survival. It was choosing myself for once, fully, unapologetically. I set the phone down, the room vibrating faintly with the heavy roll of thunder outside. The rain hadn't come yet, but it would. You could feel it in the air, that thick electric pull. I leaned against the wall, arms folded, feeling more anchored than I had in years. They could cry, they could rage, they could smear my name to anyone who would listen, but they couldn't reach me anymore, because I wasn't standing still, waiting to be dragged back into their chaos. I was walking away, and for the first time, truly, they weren't coming with me. Another low rumble shook the windows, and I whispered into the growing storm, my voice steady and sure. The next time they reach out, it'll be too late. The days after the final call settled into a strange, thick calm. Not peaceful exactly, but suspended, like the air before a storm finally breaks. I woke up that morning to a gray, heavy sky pressing against my windows. Springfield's usual buzzing summer had been muted into a humid, suffocating quiet. Coffee in hand, I logged into my email, expecting the usual work updates. Instead, a series of forwarded legal documents blinked back at me. I clicked open the first one. Eviction notice, filed against the leaseholders of my childhood home, past due utilities, terminated service accounts, frozen credit lines. Everything that had once invisibly stayed afloat, because I made sure it did, was crumbling fast now. I stared at the screen, feeling a sharp, almost electric pang in my chest. Not regret, not even sorrow. Relief. The dominoes had started to fall the moment I stepped away, and now, finally, they were seeing just how much weight I'd been carrying for them all along. A soft knock at my door pulled me out of the moment. Just a package delivery. I signed without thinking, my mind still circling around the cascading collapse I wasn't lifting a single finger to stop. By noon, the thick humidity outside broke into a brief, ugly shower. Rain hammered the roof while I worked quietly, emails pinging into my inbox faster than I could read them. Utility companies, the county clerk's office, even the landlord's firm, all forwarding me notices about accounts they could no longer reach the primary holder for. They weren't my responsibility anymore. But because my name had once been tied to so many bills, they wanted me to see the wreckage. Message received. I poured another coffee and sat back, letting the documents pile up in unread tabs. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with another unknown number. I knew it before I answered. Clifford. I pressed accept anyway, bracing myself. His voice was thinner than I remembered, rough and unsteady. "Sweetheart," he started, trying to slip into the fatherly tone I hadn't heard in years. We just need a little help to get through this month. You know how it is. Hard times. Hard times. Harder, apparently, when you spend decades burning every bridge you had and pretending they would rebuild themselves. He continued, words tripping over themselves, painting a picture of bad luck, unexpected expenses, misfortune, but never, ever accountability. Not once did he say, "We were wrong." Not once did he say, "I'm sorry." It was all about what they needed, what they were owed. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting him fill the silence with desperate, pleading noise. When he finally paused for breath, I spoke, calm, even, unshakable. "I suggest you contact the landlord," I said, "or a lawyer." He tried again, voice cracking now. "You know we don't have anyone else, baby girl." I hung up. Mid-sentence, mid-begging, mid-history. I set the phone down gently, like closing the final page of a book I would never reread. The rain outside had eased into a steady drip, the sidewalks glistening under the dull afternoon light. I moved to the window and leaned my forehead against the glass, watching the water slide down in long, lazy streaks. Was it cruel? Maybe. But survival doesn't ask for kindness from the people who abandoned you first. They chose their pride. They chose their negligence. They chose to pretend their hands were clean while expecting mine to stay dirty for them. And I, finally, fully, had chosen myself. The guilt didn't stick anymore. It slid off me like the rain off the glass. They could rebuild if they wanted. They could start fresh, or they could drown in the mess they made. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet tap of rain against the window, feeling it settle into my bones, not as sadness, but as clean, clear freedom. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It had already passed. And for the first time, I wasn't standing in the wreckage. I was free of it. By the time August rolled around, the sharp biting heat of midsummer had mellowed into golden evenings. The city slowed down, students out for break, families on vacation, the streets quieter. So was I. I stood in my small apartment, barefoot on the warm wooden floor, surveying what I had built. It wasn't much. A second-hand couch I found on Facebook Marketplace, a desk that wobbled if you leaned too hard, a handful of thrift store plants reaching lazily for the sun. But every inch of it was mine. No framed family portraits adorned my walls. Instead, there were certificates of my students' achievements, snapshots of smiling faces at the center I now managed, kids whose names I remembered because I chose to. I brewed a pot of coffee, humming quietly under my breath. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, and the smell of freshly cut grass wafted through the open window. Life was simple, steady, good. I was arranging books on a low shelf when the knock came at my door, a soft, uncertain sound. Frowning, I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened it. No one there, just a brown package sitting neatly on the welcome mat. No return address. Curious, I carried it inside and sliced it open with my house key. Inside was a simple frame, a photo. Wesley and me, maybe 7 and 10 years old, grinning with missing teeth and sticky hands from too much candy. He had his arms slung over my shoulders, and I was laughing, head thrown back in carefree joy. Tucked behind the frame was a small note, the handwriting shaky but unmistakable. I didn't know what you were carrying. I do now. I'm sorry. L. I sat down hard on the couch, the frame resting in my lap. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The tears that rose weren't for the people they were now. They were for the kids we used to be. The ones who hadn't learned yet that love came with conditions, that loyalty was expected but rarely returned. I set the frame gently on the side table, next to a small, healthy succulent. Maybe that was all the closure I'd ever get. Maybe that was enough. Later that week, after a full day at the center, my coworkers invited me out for drinks. I almost said no, old instincts still whispering that belonging wasn't meant for me, but something stronger pushed me to accept. The bar was small, cozy, strings of fairy lights crisscrossing the ceiling. Laughter bubbled easily from our table, inside jokes forming faster than I could keep up. One of the interns toasted to me, sloshing her drink a little as she declared, "To Davina, the only reason half of us aren't flunking out." Everyone laughed, and I did too, genuine and full. I looked around, faces glowing under the lights, easy camaraderie swirling around us, and realized family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is the people who show up when you aren't perfect, the ones who see you, not what you can give them, not how you make them look, but you. And for the first time I had that. I built it myself. That weekend, feeling oddly light, I decided to try one last time to reconnect with Velma, my aunt. Maybe enough time had passed. Maybe wounds had softened. I crafted a short, polite email. No accusations, no emotional minefields. Just an olive branch. 2 days later, her reply landed. One line. Hope you're doing well. Take care. Nothing more. No warmth. No acknowledgement. And just like that, I knew. Some bridges weren't just burned. They were never meant to be crossed again. And that, too, was a kind of freedom. On the evening of my birthday, I stood on my small balcony, a slice of cake balanced on the railing, a plastic fork in hand. The sun dipped low over the city, bathing the streets in gold and long shadows. I breathed in deep, the smell of late summer, the hum of distant laughter, the quiet click of possibility unfurling around me. I hadn't just survived them. I survived myself. After everything, if there's one thing I could tell the version of me who stayed too long, hoped too hard, and loved without limits, it's this. You don't owe anyone your self-destruction in the name of loyalty. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to survive. You are allowed to thrive. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who teach us how to love ourselves by refusing to do it first. And that's not a tragedy. It's a beginning. I hope if you're standing at a crossroads right now, you remember freedom doesn't come from waiting for them to change. It comes from deciding you deserve more, even if you have to walk away to find it. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose yourself over people you once called family? What helped you stay strong when the guilt tried to pull you back? If this story touched your heart, please leave it in the comments or tell me which state you're watching from. And if you didn't quite connect with it, that's okay too. Let me know what you would have done differently and where you're tuning in from. I truly want to hear your voice. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more real, raw stories like this. Because sometimes, hearing someone else's journey reminds us that we're not alone in ours. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.
Hi, my name's Althea, and at 19 I found a lump at the base of my neck. I told my parents. They said I was being dramatic. For 7 months they called it anxiety, attention-seeking, just another phase. But I wasn't pretending. What hurts more than the pain itself is when the people you love the most decide your suffering is a performance. They told doctors not to scan me, burned reports, mocked me at family dinners. And the day I collapsed in public, they still refused to believe me. Why would parents do that? What were they trying so hard to hide? And how much damage can silence really cause? The morning I first noticed it, the world was still half asleep. Frost clung to the corners of the bathroom window like it didn't want to let go. I had just stepped out of the shower, steam curling against the mirror, my fingers massaging shampoo into my scalp when I felt it. An odd bump, small and hard, just above the base of my neck. At first, I thought maybe it was a pimple or a knot from sleeping wrong, but it didn't feel like either. It was deeper, firmer. Something about it made my skin crawl, though I couldn't explain why. I kept touching it as I towel-dried my hair, unsure whether to say anything. I wasn't someone who overreacted. At least I didn't think I was. But in our house, concern often got mistaken for drama. Downstairs, the smell of burnt toast hung in the air. Dad was already at the table with the sports section open wide like a barricade. Mom scrolled through her phone, eyes vacant. I took a breath and slid into my usual spot. "So, I found something weird this morning," I said, reaching behind my neck. "There's this lump." Mom didn't even look up. "It's probably just a swollen gland. Don't go jumping to conclusions." I tried to smile, brushing it off with a small laugh. "Yeah, maybe. It just felt kind of different." Dad peeked over the paper. "Let me guess, WebMD told you it's terminal?" I didn't answer. I'd learned by now that sarcasm was their favorite flavor of deflection. Over the next few days, I kept checking the lump in secret. It didn't go away. In fact, it seemed bigger, a little more pronounced each morning, like it was quietly staking a claim. I'd wake up before anyone else just to examine it in the mirror, hoping I was imagining things. But it was real, and it was growing. On Thursday, while we were unloading groceries from the car, I brought it up again. "Mom, that lump I mentioned. It's getting bigger." She didn't even blink. "Stop Googling stuff, Althea. You'll give yourself a stroke." "I'm not Googling," I started, but Dad cut me off from the front porch. "Are we seriously doing this again? You remember the ER bill from last year? $300 so some doctor could tell us you were anxious." His voice was louder than necessary, like he wanted the neighbors to hear. That had been last fall. I'd gone in for heart palpitations and shortness of breath. Turns out it was a panic attack. They'd made me feel like a criminal for even asking for help. This was different. I knew it, but their eyes said otherwise. That night in bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt like I was sinking. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just too much. Again, I wanted to believe that. It would have been easier, but the lump kept growing. By the following Tuesday, I could feel it when I tilted my head, a small pressure, like a coin pressing into muscle. I skipped my afternoon English class, took the bus downtown, and walked 3 blocks in the snow to the free clinic by the library. The nurse there was kind. She didn't make me feel stupid for showing up. She pressed gently on the area and nodded. "You need an ultrasound," she said. "Possibly more imaging, but I'd start there." Her tone was firm, but not frightening. It gave me hope, for about a week. Then the bill arrived. I found it tucked in between junk mail on the kitchen counter, An envelope marked Boulder Health Services. I knew instantly what it was. My heart sank. I had used my ID, not the family insurance, but somehow they'd still sent it home. That night, Dad slammed the envelope on the kitchen table like a warning flare. "What the hell is this, Althea?" I tried to explain. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't. "So you sneak off to some clinic and rack up more bills? You think money grows on trees?" "It was $75, I whispered. He scoffed. "75 now. What's next? MRIs? Surgeries? You think we're gonna foot the bill every time you get a tickle in your throat?" Mom watched silently, her arms folded, not meeting my eyes. He walked over to the fridge, grabbed his keys, and came back. "Gas card's cut. Joint account. Locked. You want to waste money on drama? Earn it first." My breath caught. He wasn't yelling anymore. That was worse. The cold finality in his tone made it clear this wasn't just about money. Later that evening, I stood by the window watching snow collect on the streetlights. The kitchen behind me was dark. My fingers absent-mindedly touched the lump again. Still there. Still growing. I remembered what the nurse had said about early detection, about the importance of not waiting. I thought about the ultrasound I might not get, the scan I might not afford, and how easy it was for them to label me broken so they didn't have to deal with me. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stood there until my toes went numb. Because that night, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit before. They weren't going to help me, and that meant I had to figure out how to help myself. I kept to myself for the next few days, drifting through the house like someone who'd overstayed her welcome in her own life. I didn't speak much. Not to my parents, not to my co-workers, not even to the nurse who called and left a message about scheduling the ultrasound. I didn't call back. What would be the point? The gas card was gone, and so was the illusion that I had anyone in my corner. Instead, I started writing things down. In a notebook I kept under my mattress, I began tracking every symptom: the ache in my neck that now radiated to my shoulder, the tightening sensation when I turned too fast, the way my head would pulse when I bent forward, like my skull was trying to shake something loose. I jotted down dates, times, things people said, my father's words echoing in block letters. Drama doesn't pay bills. The insult hadn't even stung anymore. It just settled in like a second skin. Marlena, my mother, began moving around me differently. She never asked how I was, but she'd glance at me when she thought I wasn't looking, her eyes narrowing. I'd catch her folding laundry slower than necessary, as if she was listening for something unspoken. The lump hadn't shrunk. If anything, it had become more defined, easier to feel when I tilted my head slightly. But I stopped bringing it up. I wore my hair down every day, sometimes layered it with a scarf. I got good at looking fine, at being agreeable, smiling when spoken to, laughing when expected. The performance became a kind of second nature, like muscle memory. One Saturday evening, as the last rays of sun streaked the kitchen tiles, I walked in to make tea. Marlena sat in the living room, her feet tucked beneath her, a half-empty glass of Pinot Grigio resting on the coffee table. The fireplace was lit, more for ambiance than warmth, but its glow flickered against the polished wood floor. "Althea," she said, her tone unsettlingly calm. "Come sit." I hesitated. Her voice didn't carry tension, no bite, and that made me wary. I moved to the love seat across from her. She held something in her hand. My stomach tightened. It was the report from the clinic, the printout I had folded and hidden inside my old economics textbook under my bed. She must have gone through my room. "You've been keeping secrets," she said, swirling her wine slowly. "I just didn't want another fight," I replied, barely above a whisper. She smiled, tight-lipped, hollow. "You've always had a flair for melodrama." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but she raised her hand. "You think this," she held up the paper, "is helping? That bringing more fear into this house is noble? Selfless?" I blinked. "Fear? You're poisoning this family with anxiety," she said, her voice flat. "And I won't allow it." She stood up, walked over to the fireplace, and without warning, dropped the report into the flames. I lunged forward instinctively, but it was too late. The edges curled instantly, ink bleeding away as the heat consumed it. A corner floated briefly before disintegrating completely. "You don't get to control this house with your paranoia," she said calmly, brushing invisible lint from her sweater. "One more stunt like this, and I'll consider it a cry for help, of the psychiatric kind." She didn't wait for a response, just turned and walked down the hall, her wineglass still in hand, like she hadn't just destroyed the only documentation I had. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind spun, not with fear, but with clarity. That lump wasn't the only thing growing. So was the space between what I needed and what they were willing to give. Sunday passed without incident. I stayed mostly in my room, headphones in, pretending to study. Monday morning came, and I tied a scarf tightly around my neck before heading to my shift at the bookstore. At work, I smiled. Told Linda it was just a muscle knot. Told coworkers I'd slept weird. Told myself I could hold it together until I figured out what came next. I didn't bring it up again at home. At dinner, I asked about the weather, commented on the lasagna, laughed when Dad told a story from his office. I played the part, and no one noticed the difference because I'd been rehearsing for this role all my life. But in private, I wrote, every night I opened that same notebook, now stashed behind a panel in my closet, and added to the growing list. January 24th, sharp pain when turning left. January 27th, numbness in right fingertips. January 30th, Marlena burned the report. Witnessed, no apology, no acknowledgement. I scanned receipts, taped in the appointment slip from the clinic, still crumpled but legible. Even the voicemail, I'd saved it. The nurse's gentle voice saying, "We really recommend you come in for imaging soon." One night, while rereading the list, I paused on a single sentence and rewrote it over and over until the ink bled through the page. Next time they look me in the eye, I want them to see the ashes. By midweek, the tension in the house had settled into a strange, rehearsed silence. I went through motions like a ghost, quiet, measured, calculated. The ache in my neck pulsed with a steady rhythm, a reminder that something inside me was changing, whether anyone wanted to admit it or not. That Thursday morning, just as I was pulling my coat over my shoulders to head to work, Marlena stepped into the doorway of the kitchen, holding a garment bag with 2 fingers like it might stain her blouse. "Try this on after work. Your grandfather's dinner is Saturday. You'll need to look put together." I paused, my hand on the door. "Is this mandatory?" Her tone sharpened. "He's turning 80. We'll be taking photos. I expect you to smile." "I'm not sure I'm feeling up to it," I replied cautiously. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Then act like you are." I didn't argue. I just left. Saturday arrived fast, cloaked in fresh snow and a kind of cold that seeped under your skin no matter how many layers you wore. The house buzzed with preparation. Marlena had the kitchen radio on, tuned to old jazz, humming along while slicing lemons for water glasses like we were hosting royalty. By late afternoon, she handed me a long, wine-colored dress. It was elegant, high-necked, and clearly designed to cover my lump. "Hair down, no bun," she instructed, not looking up from the eyeliner she was applying in the hallway mirror. "And wear a scarf, not one of those knitted monstrosities, the silk one." In the bathroom mirror, I looked at myself and barely recognized the reflection. The fabric clung to me in all the ways I didn't want. My hair hung over my shoulders like a curtain. The silk scarf, carefully draped, completed the illusion. From the outside, I was fine, but my skin itched beneath every thread. We arrived at my uncle's house just after 6. The place was warm, loud, and filled with the smell of pot roast and candles. Dozens of family members I hadn't seen in months greeted each other with shrill joy and long, forced hugs. I found a seat at the far end of the dining table. The light from the chandelier above cast a warm glow over the tablecloths, but the nausea had already begun to set in. I pressed a hand to my stomach, hoping no one noticed. "You look thin, sweetie," my Aunt Marlene, yes, another one, commented from across the table. Before I could respond, my mother's voice cut in smoothly. "Althea's just watching her carbs lately." I stared at my plate. My father chuckled from the other end. We've raised a whole generation of glass flowers. Can't even sit through a dinner without wilting. The room laughed. I didn't. Halfway through the main course, I stood up, mumbling something about needing the restroom. My head was swimming, and every step felt like walking through molasses. I turned the corner toward the hallway, and everything blurred. The next thing I knew, I was gripping the wall, trying to stay upright. "Althea!" My mother's voice hissed. A moment later, she appeared, grabbing my elbow and guiding me into a nearby storage room. The door shut with a click behind us. Her face was tight, controlled. "You need to pull it together." I swayed slightly, my breath catching. "I'm trying. I don't feel—" "I don't care," she said. "Smile or leave. I will not have you ruin this family's name over one of your episodes." My voice cracked. "You care more about appearances than my life." The slap came so fast I didn't register it until my cheek burned. It wasn't loud, just precise. My ears rang. She straightened her scarf, adjusted the bracelet on her wrist. "Wipe your face, fix your lipstick, and get back to your seat, or leave now and don't come back." I left. I didn't say goodbye. Didn't wait for a ride. I walked the 2 miles home in thin heels and a dress that clung to my ribs like a secret. The wind bit at my legs, but the cold was easier to bear than sitting through another moment pretending I was someone I wasn't. 2 days passed before I could speak more than a sentence at a time. I stayed in my room, headphones on, letting Billie Holiday hum me back into something resembling calm. Tuesday morning, just after I dragged the trash cans to the curb, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from the side of the mailbox. It wasn't folded like junk mail, and it didn't have a stamp, just my name, in shaky cursive. I looked around. No one in sight. Snow lined the edges of the sidewalk like a frame. I pulled the letter out carefully, unfolding it slowly. "I saw what happened at the party," it began. "I used to be a nurse. That lump's not normal. If you need help, knock on the green door across from yours. House 24. There was no name, just the house number. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from something sharper. The feeling that someone saw me, really saw me. I stood there for a long time, the letter warm in my pocket, my heartbeat louder than the wind. I kept the note tucked inside a sock drawer, wedged between thick wool and an old birthday card from my aunt. I didn't look at it every day, but I knew it was there, like a candle I hadn't lit yet. I wasn't ready, not yet. The week trudged on. Work hours blurred, and the lump throbbed with a dull, steady rhythm. I wore scarves daily, even indoors, claiming the cold bothered me. It was easier than explaining the truth, easier than facing the conversations I knew would go nowhere. Mid-February had brought a relentless chill to Boulder, and Saturday came coated in a soft layer of snow that shimmered in the morning light. I arrived early to the bookstore, keys jingling in gloved fingers as I unlocked the front entrance. The world felt still, like it was holding its breath. I stocked the cafe fridge, wiped down the front counter, then moved to the fiction section to reshelve returns. Around 10, light flurries began to fall outside the storefront windows, dancing between passing cars and bundled-up pedestrians. By 11, the headache returned. Not a sharp one, more like pressure, building steadily behind my left eye. I blinked a few times, hoping it would fade. It didn't. I reached up to adjust my scarf and felt a jolt of pain shoot down my neck. My knees locked. I steadied myself against the bookcase, gripping the shelf until my knuckles turned white. "Althea?" Linda's voice floated from the register. "I'm okay," I called back. "Just need a sec." But I wasn't okay. My balance faltered. The floor beneath me seemed to tilt, and before I could speak again, the light overhead fractured into 1,000 spinning dots. I reached for something, anything, but my hand met air. Then everything dropped out from under me. The next thing I registered was cold. Not just cold, biting, wet cold seeping into my coat, my dress, my skin. I was outside. How had I gotten outside? There were voices, footsteps crunching on snow, someone shouting, "Call 911!" Another voice closer to my ear, "Ma'am, can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but my mouth didn't respond. I wasn't alone. For the first time in months, people were moving for me, not away from me, not against me, but toward me. A woman's hand found mine, warm and sure. "You're gonna be okay. Stay with me." The wail of the ambulance siren arrived like a lifeline, faint at first, then closer. The sky above me blurred, grayed, twisted, and then I was gone again. When I came to, fluorescent lights blinked overhead, and antiseptic filled my nose. I was lying on a hospital gurney, partially propped up, wires tracing from my arm to a monitor nearby. I tried to turn my head, but pain surged instantly. The lump was hotter than ever. A soft beep brought my gaze back to the side, just as a nurse entered, clipboard in hand. But it wasn't just her. My parents were there. My mother stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed, lips pursed in that familiar expression of disappointment. My father stood near the window, speaking to a man in scrubs. "She has a history," Marlena was saying. "Emotional exaggeration. It's happened before." I opened my mouth, but my throat was too dry to speak. The nurse looked uncertain. "She collapsed in public. There's record of a prior clinic note recommending imaging." My father stepped in. "We'd like to delay further testing. She's had anxiety episodes in the past. We don't want her exposed to unnecessary scans without a second opinion." "I didn't faint," I whispered, barely audible. But no one turned. No one looked. Protocol held. I was listed for observation, fluids, and basic blood work. Imaging was withheld. They discharged me 3 hours later with a diagnosis of fatigue and dehydration. No scans, no answers. Back home, Marlena closed the car door with one firm motion. She didn't speak until we were inside. "I won't have another scene like that," she said, slipping off her coat. "Do you realize how humiliating that was? Collapsing like that in front of everyone? Again?" I lowered myself onto the couch, head pounding. "I didn't collapse on purpose." Her voice sharpened. "You're making this family look unstable. If you need attention, say so, but don't play games with hospitals." I turned away. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, I sat cross-legged on the floor, pulling open the sock drawer. I held the letter from House 24 again, rereading the shaky words under the lamp's glow. Someone saw. Someone believed me. And yet, I hadn't gone. I set the letter on the nightstand and pulled my notebook from the closet, flipping past pages of symptoms, dates, phrases overheard. On a fresh page, I wrote in capital letters, Plan B. Underneath, just one sentence, "They don't want me to get better." I didn't wait long. 2 mornings after scribbling Plan B in my notebook, I woke with a fresh wave of nausea that rolled through me before I even swung my legs off the bed. My balance was worse. I'd always felt like something inside was off, but now, it felt like my own body was running out of time to whisper and had begun screaming. By noon, the dizziness had escalated into something I couldn't fake my way through. I was shelving books at work when my vision began to tunnel. I gripped the shelf to steady myself, blinking rapidly, but the words on the spines blurred like watercolors. My manager, Linda, noticed immediately. "You don't look well," she said gently. "You want me to call someone?" I shook my head. "No," I whispered, steadying my breath. "But I think I need to go back to the ER." She didn't question it. By 2 p.m., I was in a wheelchair, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket, being pushed through a corridor that smelled like sanitizer and stale coffee. My mother was already in the waiting area when I was brought in. My father arrived 15 minutes later, talking on the phone about a supplier delay at his office, sounding more annoyed about a shipment than about me. When I was moved to a triage room, I could hear them arguing quietly outside the curtain. "You said she fainted again?" a nurse asked. My mother's tone was rehearsed. "She has these episodes. It's always dramatic, but never serious. She overreacts. Emotional exaggeration. It runs in the family." The nurse mumbled something in reply, then slipped behind the curtain. "You're Althea?" I nodded weakly. "Yeah. Dr. Chen will be with you shortly." That name caught in my chest. When he entered, I recognized him immediately. Tall, soft-spoken, glasses slipping slightly down the bridge of his nose. His eyes didn't skip over me like most. They landed gently but stayed. "Hi, I'm Elias Chen," he said. "Neurology resident. I'll be checking on you." He introduced himself to my parents with the same polite tone, but I saw the subtle shift in his gaze when my father interrupted his introduction to remind him we didn't authorize imaging. "Yes, I understand," Dr. Chen said calmly. "Let me check a few things first." Once inside the exam room, he pulled the curtain closed and gestured toward the bed. I climbed up slowly. He washed his hands, pulled on gloves, and began his checkup without small talk. When he pressed lightly near the base of my skull, I winced involuntarily. His eyes flicked up. "Too much?" he asked. I nodded. "Dizziness? Nausea?" "Both." He paused. "Do you want to speak with me privately?" My breath hitched. I nodded again. Just once. He didn't flinch. "Give me a few minutes." He stepped outside. I heard him politely ask my parents to give him some space for a neurological screening. It worked. Their voices faded, then the door clicked shut. Inside that room, with just the hum of fluorescent lights between us, he pulled up a chair. "I'm going to ask you a few questions," he said. But his voice wasn't clinical. It was quiet. Personal. I didn't look at him as I whispered, "There's a lump. It's behind my neck. They won't let me get it checked." He was silent for a few seconds. Then, "How long?" 7 months. He took a slow breath. "You haven't had any imaging?" "They say it's all in my head." He didn't respond with pity. He didn't start typing into a chart. Instead, he leaned forward slightly. "You don't need permission to be taken seriously," he said. The words hung there like a lifeline. That night, I was given a room in the observation wing, supposedly for hydration and monitoring, but I knew better. It was Dr. Chen who kept me longer, who entered an MRI request under his own discretion, coded for neurological compromise with progressive symptomatology. It was done in silence. No announcement, no parental input. The technician didn't ask questions. They slid me into the machine, head strapped still, the cold surface humming beneath me. For nearly 30 minutes, I lay motionless, listening to the clicks and whirs of the machine, the rhythm of data being etched into certainty. When it ended, I was rolled out, helped back to the room. They told me someone would review the results shortly. Dr. Chen arrived later that evening. The lights were dim. My parents had stepped out to get coffee. He didn't say much, just wheeled in a monitor, adjusted the screen, and turned it to face me. There it was. Even before he spoke, I saw it. A dark mass, unmistakable, growing like a shadow against the pale outline of my brainstem. He pointed gently to the edge. "This is the lump you mentioned." I stared at it, heart racing. "It's compressing your lower brain structures. That's why you're dizzy. Why you fainted. Why you're in pain." My throat tightened. "You weren't faking anything," he said. "And now we act." Tears slid silently down my cheeks, but I wasn't crying out of fear. I was crying because finally, there was proof. I looked at him and smiled, voice hoarse but clear. "Then, let's begin." It was a Thursday morning when the message came in. I was seated at my desk in the study nook, legs tucked under me, one hand absently turning the pages of a neurology journal Dr. Chen had flagged for my review. My highlighter hovered over a section on vestibular migraines, something about diagnostic overlap, and I was just starting to make margin notes when my phone buzzed. I ignored it at first. Background noise. Then it buzzed again, longer this time. A voice memo. The sender, Noor, my younger cousin. 16, maybe 17 now. She never messaged without a reason. Noor existed on the edge of family drama, close enough to see it, distant enough not to drown in it. And that distance gave her something I'd learned to value: perspective. I reached for the phone, flipped it over, and tapped play. At first, all I heard was ambient chatter, silverware clinking, laughter from another room. Then, layered beneath the noise, I heard something else. A voice. Familiar, sharp. Unmistakably hers. My mother. If you let her think it's real, it becomes real. The words came wrapped in sugar-laced condescension, controlled, rehearsed, the tone she reserved for dinner parties and backhanded concern. Then another voice, male, smirking in its cadence. Griffin, my uncle. She thinks she has a tumor now. Next week it'll be a heart condition. Laughter followed. Light, unbothered, cruel. I sat still, not stunned, not shocked, just very, very still. The audio ended, but it kept ringing in my ears like something that refused to die quietly. And the strangest part? I didn't cry. Not this time. I played it again, slower, pausing between sentences, letting each word sink in, not because I didn't understand what they were saying, but because I finally did, because there was no ambiguity here, no margin left for misinterpretation, no cushion of benefit of the doubt. They hadn't misunderstood me. They had denied me. I forwarded the file to Dr. Chen within minutes, then to Reina, my patient advocate at the hospital. I didn't include commentary. I didn't ask for their take. I just sent it, because I didn't need validation. I needed them to see what I'd been up against. Then I opened my laptop and created a new folder on the desktop. Not faking it. Evidence inside it. I dropped everything. My MRI scans, blood work, diagnostic notes. Transcripts from my personal journal of conversations that had never made it into medical records. I uploaded the voice memo, along with the metadata, scanned receipts from the free clinic I'd visited when my insurance lapsed, email chains with dates and timestamps, my symptom log, recorded with precision, color-coded by intensity. This wasn't about begging for care anymore. It wasn't about pleading for empathy. It was documentation, for legal use, for protection, for proof. That evening, my parents showed up for my follow-up with Dr. Chen, uninvited. I met them in the hospital lobby, standing by the blue faux leather chairs next to the check-in desk. Marlena, my mother, spotted me first. "We'll come back with you," she said, already moving toward the elevators. "No," I replied. She blinked, confused. "What?" "You're not coming in with me." Her tone sharpened, like a switchblade suddenly unsheathed. "You don't make the rules, Althea." "This isn't about—" "You've made your statement," I said, steady. "Now it's my turn." She took half a step back. My father stood beside her, silent, unmoving. Dr. Chen arrived just then. He glanced at them, then at me. I nodded. He didn't need further context. Inside the exam room, it felt like something in the air had shifted. Not tension, truth. Finally given space to breathe. He handed me a paper from the hospital's legal department. A contact, someone for patients who believed they'd experienced systemic neglect. I took the paper and folded it once, then twice. I didn't hesitate. 2 days later, I met with Reina again, but this time, it wasn't just advocacy, it was a record. We sat in her small office tucked near the end of the hallway. The blinds were drawn, sunlight bleeding softly across her desk. Her eyes scanned the printouts I brought, the flash drive I slid across the surface. "They've deliberately blocked access to your care," she said quietly. I didn't blink. "This recording adds a different layer." I nodded once, calm. "There's more," I said. "Everything's organized by date." She paused, looking at me longer than usual. "You've been preparing for this." "No," I replied, my voice clear. "I've been surviving. This is different." That night, I skipped dinner. I stayed in my room, the overhead light off, headphones on. I reread the transcript I'd typed from the audio, every word spaced clearly on the page, each sentence printed on its own sheet, front-facing, centered, not for drama, for impact, for truth. I placed them in a manila envelope, marked the front in black permanent ink. For the day they tried to deny it all. I locked it in my desk drawer, not for vengeance, for remembrance, for justice. At 9:12 p.m., my phone buzzed again. "Noor, you okay?" I stared at her message, then replied, "I'm more than okay. Thank you. That recording, you don't know what it meant." Her response came quickly. "I think I do. But be careful. They're talking. I stared at those words. They're talking. Of course they were. I closed the chat, turned back to the screen, opened the audio file once more. Let it fill my ears, not to hurt me, not to haunt me, but to remind me. This was never my imagination. This wasn't anxiety. This was real. I saved another copy to an external hard drive, then another to cloud storage. I labeled each version with the date and time. Then, I pulled out a second flash drive and placed it in the box beneath my bed, the one labeled emergency. Inside were my medical directives, my ID copies, and now, this. I sat on the floor for a while, not doing anything, just breathing. Then I whispered aloud, not for drama, not for echo, but for clarity. Now they don't get to speak for me anymore. And I meant it. For the first time, I didn't need to defend my voice, I just needed to use it, and I would. Deliberately, irrefutably, unapologetically, one page, one file, one truth at a time. The backlash didn't take long to land. It rarely does when silence is your family's favorite currency, and someone like Noor dares to break it. It was Sunday afternoon when she called. I'd just finished folding laundry, watching steam curl from the mug beside me, when her name lit up on my phone. I answered quickly, but didn't expect the sound that greeted me, raw sobbing, half-choked. They cornered me at brunch, she whispered between shaky breaths. Your mom and Griffin, they said I doctored the recording. I sat up straighter. They what? They said I manipulated the file, that I was spreading poison through the family, and my dad, he's furious. He said I embarrassed us. My chest tightened. Noor, you didn't do anything wrong. She took a breath, trying to steady herself. They want me to apologize, publicly. Say it was a mistake, that I misunderstood what was said. What did you tell them? A pause. Then, stronger. I told them, you're not protecting a family. You're protecting lies. I closed my eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by a surge of both pride and sorrow. She was barely 16, and she was standing taller than adults who should have known better. I'm so sorry, I said. Don't be. I knew what I was doing. Her voice steadied further, like her fear had turned to clarity mid-call. But you need to be careful. They're talking about getting ahead of this, trying to control the narrative. That's how they put it. Of course they were. After we hung up, I sat in silence, listening to the hum of the dryer. The same machine that had spun my shirts for years now sounded like a war drum in a quiet house. Noor didn't deserve to be the one taking hits for truth. But her courage pushed something deeper into focus. The time for quiet was over. 2 days later, just as the afternoon sun dipped behind the bookstore's awning, I stepped out from my shift to find Nurse Raina waiting by the bench near the bus stop. She wasn't in scrubs today, just jeans, a windbreaker, her hair pulled back into a loose braid. I approached cautiously. Is something wrong? She smiled, soft but serious. No, but I have something for you. She reached into her tote and handed me a manila envelope. I shouldn't do this, she said lowly, glancing around. But I want you to have it. In case they try to make you doubt yourself again. I took it, hands steady. Inside was the full MRI report, signed, stamped, dated. The radiologist's notes were underlined. Mass consistent with prolonged growth pattern, likely compressing cranial nerve structures. Early intervention would have mitigated neurological compromise. At the bottom, in small handwriting, was a note from Dr. Chen. Documented history of delayed care. Patient presented clear symptoms. I looked up at her, throat tight. Thank you. You deserve better than gaslight and paperwork walls. She left after that, just a quiet nod and a hand on my arm. But the envelope in my hand weighed more than anything else I carried home that night. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. I knew what it meant. That Thursday, I met with a civil attorney, Ms. Hannah Richter, mid-40s, soft-spoken, sharp-eyed. Her office smelled like lemon-scented folders and cautious optimism. We went through everything, the scans, the dates, the recordings, my timeline, Noor's memo, the MRI copy. She flipped through it with a practiced grace. Then she looked at me. This isn't just delayed care. This is obstruction. This qualifies under medical neglect. I nodded. I know. Do you want to pursue it formally? I paused for just a second. Yes. Later that night, I ate dinner at the same table as always. Marlena passed the salt. My father commented on the March weather, how unpredictable it was lately. They didn't ask about my health, didn't mention Noor, pretended the foundation wasn't crumbling beneath them. I played along. I smiled, nodded, asked about the weekend, but something had shifted. The way I sat taller, the way I looked them in the eye, the way I no longer flinched when silence filled the room. I wasn't afraid of it anymore, because now I understood its shape. Silence wasn't neutral, it was complicit. When they retreated to their nightly routine, television, wine, scrolling on separate devices, I returned to my room. I opened my laptop, double-checked every file, uploaded the final draft of the complaint. My hands didn't shake. I hovered over the submit button for only a breath. Then I clicked. The screen refreshed. Confirmation. Filed. Documented. Official. I closed the lid, leaned back in my chair, and whispered to the quiet. You thought silence was protection. Let's see how it defends you now. The following Tuesday morning, I was folding receipts from my latest appointment into my planner when the television caught my eye. The volume was low, barely above the hum of the heater, but the words running across the screen landed harder than any shout. Up next on Heart of the Family, a courageous couple helping their daughter overcome health anxiety with tough love. I froze, fingers still gripping a receipt. The teaser clip rolled. There they were. Marlena, camera ready in her signature lavender blouse, smiled tightly as she sat beside Griffin, whose voice carried that same casual superiority I remembered from every uncomfortable holiday dinner. I'm not saying parenting's easy, he chuckled, but sometimes love means saying, enough. You can't let fear rule a household. Then Marlena, with a faux gentle nod, we helped our daughter overcome medical anxiety through structure, through boundaries, through refusing to validate hysteria. I didn't realize I'd stood up until my chair scraped the floor behind me. My chest felt hollow. The air was suddenly thicker than it had been a moment ago. I turned the volume down completely. I didn't need to hear more. I'd heard enough lies to recognize them in any volume. They weren't content with discrediting me behind closed doors anymore. Now, they were packaging it for broadcast, using my trauma as a family branding opportunity. By mid-afternoon, the clip had made the rounds online. My cousin Noor sent me a screen-recorded version with 3 words. They're doubling down. I didn't respond immediately. I couldn't. Instead, I called Dr. Chen. He picked up after 2 rings. I saw it, he said, before I could even introduce myself. Don't speak to the press. We'll handle this. I'm not going on TV, I said, but I'm not staying quiet either. He was silent for a beat, then, understood. That night, in a quiet corner of Raina's office, I watched her slide a sealed envelope across the table. No return address, she said. We were told to deliver it to the producers directly. I opened it. Inside was everything, clean and precise. A copy of my MRI scans, a notarized letter from Dr. Chen outlining the timeline of ignored symptoms, my original voice recording, screenshots of appointment rejections, the formal legal complaint. We're not leaking anything, Raina added. We're correcting the narrative. At 10:30 the next morning, the talk show segment was pulled. A short statement appeared on their social media pages by noon. Due to new information regarding the content of our upcoming episode, we've chosen to cancel the segment. We remain committed to stories that align with truth, dignity, and medical integrity. By evening, their corporate sponsors had begun withdrawing. The production team issued a follow-up apology, not to me by name, but to those whose experiences were misrepresented in the preparation of this broadcast. Marlena and Griffin disappeared from the media almost instantly. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like the invisible one. And yet, I didn't gloat. I didn't post screen captures or rush to interviews. I didn't even reply to the dozens of messages Noor forwarded me from distant relatives. some apologizing, others still spewing denial. Instead, I wrote, that Thursday, I published an open letter online titled, I Wasn't Faking It. It wasn't flashy. Just my voice, in my words. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I described the slow ache of being disbelieved, the erosion of self-worth when your body is screaming and the people meant to protect you cover their ears. I explained what it meant to grow up learning that illness equals weakness, that help is conditional, and that silence is safer than truth, until it isn't. Within 2 days, it had over 70,000 shares. Young people sent me their own journal entries. Parents wrote that they'd reevaluated how they'd handled their children's health fears. A few nurses and therapists reached out, thanking me for helping them see the signs they'd missed. I didn't respond to everyone. I couldn't, but I read each one, often with trembling hands. It wasn't vindication I wanted, it was acknowledgement. And now, I had it. A week later, I stood outside House 24, the same green-doored bungalow where a stranger had once slipped me a note that started this whole second life. In my hands was a folder. Inside, blueprints, a proposal, the official approval letter for a new nonprofit. One designed to support youth who'd been denied medical care by family, intentionally or through neglect. We were calling it the Second Voice Foundation, because for people like me, the first voice was often dismissed, and sometimes the second one saves your life. The folding chairs were arranged in neat rows beneath the low amber glow of the overhead lights. Each seat held a simple trifold program, printed on thick ivory cardstock with a charcoal serif font that read, The Second Voice Foundation, Launch Event. Beneath the title, a single line in softer script. For the ones who were told, it's just in your head. I stood backstage, my palms resting gently against the edge of the podium. My notes were clipped neatly, barely ruffled despite how many times I'd gone over them. I breathed slowly, in through my nose, out through my mouth, each breath anchoring me in the moment. Not rehearsed, not postured, just present. Raina adjusted the microphone for the final time, her eyes scanning my face like a mirror, offering silent encouragement. She didn't say anything, but the nod she gave me held more weight than any words could. Noor was already seated in the second row, her posture calm, hands folded delicately in her lap, her expression a steady kind of focused. She looked older than when I'd first met her, maybe not in age, but in truth. There was a quiet maturity in her now that only comes from surviving something and still choosing softness. She wasn't the only one who had grown. So had I. It had only been a year, but it had felt like a lifetime's worth of letting go, of stripping away what didn't belong, a year of unlearning how to shrink and relearning how to stand, not just physically, but emotionally, legally, spiritually. The lawsuit had settled quietly in July. No cameras, no courtrooms, no final act to tidy it all up. My attorney, in his usual crisp tone, had called it a decisive outcome. Their legal team, not surprisingly, called it a regrettable family misunderstanding. The payout covered the remainder of my medical bills and the costs of launching the nonprofit, filing, licensing, early overhead. It wasn't hush money, it was seed money, and I refused to let it be framed as anything less. I hadn't attended the final mediation. I'd made the choice not to sit through another conversation where the truth was treated like something negotiable. I didn't want to be in another room where the word integrity meant something different depending on who was speaking. There was no apology, not a single call, letter, or message from any of them since the day the segment was pulled from the air. Months ago, their lawyer sent a sterile, single-sentence email. They did what they believed was right. I never responded. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I knew that saying it would hand them closure they hadn't earned. I had stopped performing grief for people who only showed up to audit it. Now I lived alone in a small, sun-worn studio apartment a few blocks from downtown Boulder. The elevator rarely worked, and the windows didn't close all the way, so the winter breeze came in like a tenant. But it was mine. Quiet, unassuming, safe. A place where the sound of footsteps outside the door didn't make my breath catch. My left ear was gone, functionally, at least. The doctors called it profound hearing loss, which was their polite way of saying irreversible. The mild vertigo still came and went in waves, especially if I stood too quickly or turned too sharply, but I'd learned the rhythm of imbalance, learned how to sit with it instead of bracing. More importantly, I had stopped hiding the way it reshaped my life. Tonight was proof of that. The launch of the Second Voice Foundation wasn't just a milestone, it was a declaration that I wasn't going to keep surviving in secret, that my story, and the stories of women like me, mattered enough to build a home for them in the world. I peeked out from behind the curtain once more. In the front row sat a woman with shoulder-length silver hair. She raised her hand slightly when she saw me, offering a gentle wave. House 24. That's what she'd called the shelter when she introduced herself the night she sat beside me in silence, back when the world felt uninhabitable. I still didn't know her name. She'd never asked for thanks. She was simply there, then and now. I caught Noor's gaze. She gave me 2 exaggerated thumbs up and a bright grin that loosened my chest. I smiled back, the air finally making its way in again. A volunteer handed me a glass of water. I accepted it with a quiet nod, took one small sip, and then stepped forward just as the lights dimmed. There was no music, no staged fanfare, just silence. And me. I walked to the podium and didn't read from the full speech I'd written. The cards were there, clipped and ready, but I barely glanced at them. My voice knew where it needed to go. I'm not a survivor because I fought back, I said, each word clear in the hush. I'm a survivor because I stopped waiting for permission to exist. That was it. That was all. The room didn't erupt into applause right away. Instead, a long, sacred silence held us all in place. And then, gradually, one by one, the room stood. Not for show, not out of politeness, but out of recognition, understanding, solidarity. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The moment was already complete. As I stepped back to my seat, Noor leaned toward me and whispered, "You were always meant to do this." Later that week, I took a short trip by myself, just a packed lunch, a journal, and a worn-out backpack. I parked near a trail I hadn't walked since I was a teenager, the one that twisted through the hills north of town and ended at a lake so still, it once felt like a secret. Back then, I used to ride my bike here after school, before the noise began, before the world started handing out scars like they were keepsakes. I reached the lake by mid-afternoon. The breeze was cool but kind. The water glistened under a sky that didn't seem to remember what I'd survived. I stood at the shoreline for a long time. The scar behind my left ear caught the wind. I reached up, fingertips grazing the skin. It was smooth now, more memory than injury. I didn't think about courtrooms, or talk shows, or the echo of diagnostic machines. I thought about silence, the one I used to fill with apologies and second guesses, and the voice I'd grown in its place. A voice that didn't need to be loud to be true. A voice I now lived out loud. I still carry the wound, but it no longer tells the story. I do. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect us become the very ones we need protection from. And when truth is ignored long enough, it doesn't disappear. It becomes louder, sharper, undeniable. Have you ever been dismissed when you were trying to speak your truth? Or told your pain was just in your head? Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear how you found your voice. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that reveal the quiet battles behind closed doors. Your story might be next. Hi, I'm Daisy. At 3 a.m., I lay on the living room floor, my leg broken, blood dripping from my mouth, begging my mother to stop him. She didn't. She just watched. But that night wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point. The truth? My mother erased me long before the bruises ever showed. She changed my birth certificate, stole my scholarship, told the world I was unstable. They believed her. Now I'm speaking for every daughter who was told to be quiet, to be grateful, to stay small. Why would a mother choose a man over her own child? Why would a family rewrite history and leave you out of the story? And how do you rebuild your life when the people who broke you still call it love? Let me tell you what happened. I woke up to the sharp taste of blood in my mouth and the sound of my own breathing. Shallow, panicked, uneven. My cheek was pressed against the hardwood floor of the living room, cold and sticky beneath me. My left leg bent the wrong way, and when I tried to move, the scream that tore through me wasn't planned. It just escaped, pain like I'd never known, and there she was. My mother, Vera, stood at the entrance of the hallway, wrapped in a pale blue robe like she'd just stepped out of bed. Arms crossed, expression blank, the only movement was the slight sway of her slippered foot tapping gently against the carpet. "Mom!" My voice cracked. "Please!" Dexter was still yelling, his voice bouncing off the walls like bullets ricocheting. I couldn't even remember what triggered it this time. Something about money. Something about me causing problems. And then the blow came. A boot, hard, straight to my ribs. I had cried out, fallen, and that's where I stayed. But still, I looked at her. Even after everything, I thought she'd stop him. That instinct doesn't die easily. The child inside me still remembered when she used to brush the knots out of my hair while humming Patsy Cline. The woman who'd once screamed when a bee landed on my shoulder and yanked me away so quickly I cried, not because I was stung, but because her panic scared me. She'd pulled me away from pain before. I believed she would do it again. She didn't move. Dexter stopped, chest heaving, wiping sweat from his brow like it was just another job done. Then he turned and walked out of the room, past her. Didn't say a word, didn't even look her in the eye. I lay there, shaking, crying, and she stepped forward. For a moment, I thought she was coming to help me. Her shadow fell across my face. She bent slightly, not kneeling, just enough so I could hear her whisper, "You should have just signed the loan, Daisy." Then she turned and walked away. I don't remember passing out, but when I opened my eyes again, there were paramedics. One knelt beside me, asking questions I couldn't answer through the pain. Another one called out numbers I didn't understand. I caught a neighbor's face at the door, Mr. Kellerman from next door. His eyes wide, mouth tight. He didn't say anything, just watched as they lifted me onto a stretcher. The hospital lights were blinding. They always are. Too clean, too white, too loud in their own way. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching pieces of conversation I didn't understand, until I heard the unmistakable sound of heels. Hers. Vera's shoes had a rhythm, controlled, never rushed. She sat in the chair next to the bed as I came to. No hug, no hand squeeze, just her voice, flat and rehearsed. "You made things difficult for everyone. Again." I turned my head away. Back then, when I was 10, I used to think I was the problem, that I needed to shrink myself to fit into the world she wanted. I remember standing in the hallway, watching her kiss Dexter after he came home from work. The way she lit up, laughed in a way I never made her laugh. I remember thinking, if I'm quiet enough, maybe I won't get in the way. Good daughters don't cause scenes. Good daughters are grateful. Good daughters don't ask why their birthdays go uncelebrated or why the family photo wall doesn't have a single picture of them past kindergarten. I learned to be silent. I perfected it. Now, I was lying in a hospital bed, the bruises already blooming along my ribs, the bandage tight around my leg, a dull throb behind my eyes. A nurse came in and read off the damage like it was a grocery list. Broken fibula, 3 cracked ribs, mild concussion. She looked at me with soft eyes. "We can report this if you'd like. There's support available." I didn't answer right away, because the last time I said something, when I was 17 and Dexter grabbed my arm too hard in the garage and left a mark, I told a counselor. That counselor called my mother. Vera marched into the school the next day, crying and outraged, insisting I was just trying to ruin her marriage, said I was dramatic, troubled, needed attention. They believed her. So this time I just nodded and said, "No, thank you." It was almost dawn when the room emptied out again, just me and the distant beep of monitors. I stared at the ceiling, blank, white, like a canvas with nothing worth painting. The ache in my bones wasn't just physical, it was ancestral. It was the pain of women being told to endure, to hush, to take it and not make waves, and it hit me. If I left this hospital and went back to silence, back to pretending, back to being the grateful daughter, then I'd be laying in that hallway again someday. Or worse, I wouldn't be. If I walk out of here again with nothing but silence, I'll never walk out again. Not truly. I reached for my phone. My hands shook as I opened my contacts. I scrolled down. Vera. I hovered over the name for just a second, then I hit delete, and it felt like freedom. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd bought secondhand from a moving sale the year I got promoted. It was a little wobbly on one leg, but I'd always liked the imperfection. That morning, the sunlight poured in through the blinds just enough to catch the dust motes in the air, swirling like snowflakes I'd never get to hold. My right leg rested on a chair, wrapped in a thick white cast. The Velcro strap had started irritating my skin, but I hadn't bothered to adjust it. A half-open cereal box sat in front of me. I tried tearing the flap with one hand. It ripped unevenly, the bag inside spilling a few pieces onto the counter. They bounced and rolled to the floor, unbothered. I stared at them for a while. I knew I wouldn't be able to bend down to pick them up. The silence in the apartment was heavy, broken only by the tick-tick of the wall clock I'd hung 2 years ago in a fit of optimism, thinking a few decorative changes would make this place feel more like a home. But a clock doesn't change the atmosphere, not when the people who raised you never taught you what home really means. I pulled my phone closer and scrolled through the gallery. For some reason, I paused on an old photo I hadn't looked at in years. A family vacation in Florida, Disney World. I was about 14. In the corner of the image, you could see me, barely. Cut off by Vera's arm as she wrapped it around Dexter and Nico, beaming, like I was someone else's child who wandered into the frame. She never even asked me to smile. My mind drifted further back to the year I turned 16. I had just applied for a full academic scholarship. It was one of the rare moments I felt hopeful. I needed my birth certificate to finish the application. I remember walking into the kitchen and asking her for it. She handed it to me without looking up from her coffee. That's when I saw it. Father, Dexter K. Maddox. I froze. My real father, James Harrison, died when I was 5. A car accident, quick and brutal. I didn't remember much about him, but I remembered enough to know he wasn't Dexter. I looked up at Vera, confusion twisting in my chest. "This isn't right," I said, holding up the form. "I had to update it," she replied flatly, still sipping her drink. "For school records, don't be dramatic. Don't be dramatic." That was her catchphrase. The duct tape she slapped over any emotion she didn't want to deal with. Weeks later, I waited anxiously for a letter from the scholarship board. I checked the mail daily, each time hoping today would be the day. But nothing ever came. Finally, I asked my guidance counselor if they had heard anything. "You didn't get it?" she asked, brows furrowing. "They sent a notice weeks ago." I felt my stomach drop. She pulled up the record. It had been awarded. The letter sent. When I got home, I tore through the house. Something inside me knew. I went into Vera's sewing room, the one space she said was off limits. I opened the second drawer of her desk and found it, tucked under a pile of fabric scraps and receipts. A white envelope. My name written in clean print. The seal still unbroken. I opened it. There it was. Congratulations. Terms. Deadlines. And now, too late. I remember walking into the living room, holding the letter. Vera was folding laundry. "Why?" I asked, voice shaking. "Why would you hide this?" She didn't even look up. "You couldn't handle college," she said casually. "I saved you from disappointment." I stood there in shock. No anger. Just the cold realization that this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't forgetfulness. She had never planned for me to go anywhere, not physically, not emotionally, not anywhere beyond the walls she controlled. I sat in the armchair for a long time after she left the room. Everything around me suddenly felt unfamiliar, like a movie set I had wandered onto by accident. And now, years later, sitting in my apartment with a cast on my leg and bruises still darkening along my ribs, that same feeling returned, the ache that told me I had been kept small on purpose. I pulled out my notebook, not a diary, Diaries were for people waiting to be heard. This was a dossier. I started listing everything: the birth certificate, the scholarship letter, the phrases she used to cut me down. I didn't censor. I didn't explain away. On one page, I wrote the words, "She doesn't lose control. She is the control." As I flipped through pages, my eyes caught on a birthday memory. One of the last ones she acknowledged, sort of. I had baked my own cake, boxed mix, uneven frosting, but I was proud. I left it on the counter to cool, planning to surprise myself later with candles and a wish I didn't believe in. That evening, Vera hosted a small gathering for Nico's test results. She took the cake, added "Congrats, Nico" in gel icing, and set it in the center of the table. People clapped, took pictures. I stood by the fridge, pretending I wasn't supposed to be celebrated that day. She'd erased me so thoroughly, she didn't even notice the date. I closed the notebook, tightening the Velcro strap on my cast. The pain flared, but I welcomed it. I whispered, "You erased my name once. I'm going to make sure everyone remembers it now." Then I stood, not just on one leg, but on the bones of truth finally pieced together. It took me longer than usual to get dressed that morning. I wasn't rushing to go anywhere. I just wanted to feel like myself again. Or maybe figure out who that even was now. My cast made every step slow, deliberate. Every shirt I pulled over my head caught the edge of a bruise. Every movement reminded me I was still healing, inside and out. I made a cup of coffee, then stood by the window as it brewed, watching the street below. Quiet, overcast. Akron was never really loud, but on days like this, it felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. While the coffee cooled, I picked up my phone and opened Facebook, mostly out of habit. I hadn't posted anything since the hospital. I didn't want pity, but my thumb hovered over the red notification bubble. One tag, a picture. I opened it. There she was, Vera, standing between Dexter and Nico, all three of them smiling, holding up slices of cake. "Celebrating our boy's big win," the caption read, followed by clapping hands and hearts from her church friends. The cake, my cake, same frosting design, same blue and white piping I always used. I stared at the background, the kitchen wall, the vase on the table. That was my cake plate. I had made that cake the night before my last birthday, alone in my apartment because I knew no one else would. I dropped it off for them out of guilt, thinking maybe they'd still want a piece. I told myself it didn't matter. Apparently it did matter. Just not to me. I leaned back, my stomach turning. It wasn't the first time she'd erased me from something I was supposed to own. Years ago, I had spent the whole afternoon baking my own birthday cake. Box mix, dollar store candles, and frosting from a tub. It was crooked, and the color came out more gray than white, but I was proud of it. That night, Vera had guests over, family friends, some people from Dexter's job. She took the cake I'd left on the counter and added letters on top with red gel icing. "Congrats, Nico!" I stood there watching her slide it onto the dining table like it had always belonged to him. "We're celebrating his SAT results," she said. "Such a proud moment for our family." No one said a word about my birthday, not even in passing. I remember holding the lighter in my hand, thinking maybe I'd go light the candle on a slice for myself later. I never did. By midday, I was back at the kitchen table. This time, it wasn't cereal in front of me. It was a stack of printed photos, school letters, and an old high school program I had dug out of my storage bin. I spread them out like a puzzle I was just beginning to understand. There was one photo I couldn't stop looking at, my high school graduation. I was standing in the gymnasium, cap slightly askew, honor cords draped around my neck. I looked proud. I had reserved 2 seats, one for Vera, one for Dexter. They never showed. After the ceremony, I waited by the curb in my gown and heels, watching other families hug and take pictures. I had stood still, trying to smile, trying to tell myself they were just late. They never came. The scent of that day still lived in my memory. The metallic tang of rain in the air, the smell of charcoal from someone's barbecue drifting across the street, and the cheap perfume of the girl who stood too close to me in line. But mostly, it smelled like nothing, like absence, like the kind of quiet that settles over you when you realize no one's coming. I printed the graduation photo on glossy paper and circled the 2 empty seats in red ink. Not to be dramatic, just to remind myself it wasn't a dream. This was my reality. I didn't want to forget anymore. I clipped the photo to a manila folder labeled Records. Next to it, I added copies of the scholarship letter, my altered birth certificate, and screenshots of text messages with Vera over the years, cold, clipped, full of passive digs and disappointment disguised as concern. This wasn't about revenge, it was about record keeping. For once, I wanted my truth to be organized. As I stood to return the folder to the desk, my phone buzzed. One message. Daisy, it's Juno. I heard what happened. Can we talk? I froze. Juno. My heart hiccuped, a strange mix of hope and caution surging in my chest. She was the only friend I had before Vera decided she was a bad influence. We were inseparable in middle school, matching bracelets, shared books, notes passed between classes. Then one day, Vera picked me up early from school and said, "She's not your kind of people. You don't need friends like her." I never saw her again. Until now. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply. Yes, I think it's time someone else knows the whole story. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. I didn't need the whole world to listen. Just one voice to say, I believe you. After replying to Juno, I left my phone on the windowsill and sat in silence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to fill the room with background noise. No soft music, no TV murmuring in the background. Just me and the faint hum of the refrigerator. That peace didn't last. There was a knock on the door. 3 sharp raps. Not aggressive, but firm. I moved slowly, careful not to jar my healing leg. When I opened the door, a man in a brown postal jacket stood holding a large envelope. Certified mail. I signed the form without speaking, then shut the door and stared at the envelope like it was radioactive. I already knew who it was from before I turned it over. Dexter. The return address wasn't even theirs. It was a P.O. box tied to his work, probably to avoid anything being traced to their home. Typical. I walked to the kitchen, ripped the envelope open, and pulled out the documents. A mortgage contract, a signature page highlighted in yellow, and a post-it note attached that read, "Let's put this behind us. Just need your signature to close." I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I lit a match, held it to the corner of the page, and dropped the burning pile into the sink. The paper curled and blackened, the ink warping before it vanished in a wisp of smoke. I watched until every corner was ash. He really thought that after everything, after the hospital, after Vera's silence, that I would still sign. My phone vibrated again. Another text, this time from an unsaved contact, a local number. "We just need a little support, Daisy. Stop being so difficult." No name, but I didn't need one. Vera never left fingerprints. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I wrote, not in my case journal, but a letter. To myself. It started as a simple sentence. You are not responsible for their survival. The next day, the sunlight filtered through the blinds, catching the dust in the air. It reminded me of a dinner from a few months ago. Vera had invited me to the house, rare at that point. The tone was suspiciously sweet. She said they wanted to reconnect, make things right. I agreed out of sheer exhaustion. Maybe I thought there was still a chance, even after everything. The table was set with cloth napkins. Vera had even used the crystal glasses, something reserved for guests or holidays. Dexter smiled too wide. Nico barely made eye contact. After the lasagna and awkward small talk, Vera brought out dessert. Then she placed a folder on the table. "We found our dream home," she said, clasping her hands like she was announcing an engagement. Dexter leaned in, and we're finally in a position to get it. Just one hurdle. With my job change, the bank needs someone with a stable credit history. Your name would be perfect, just as a formality. I didn't touch the folder. "I'd like to review it," I said slowly. "With someone, just to understand everything." Vera's smile didn't even twitch, but Dexter's face changed. "So you don't trust your own family?" he asked, voice tightening. I looked at Vera, expecting her to chime in, to soften the blow, to maybe even defend my right to ask questions, but she just sipped her wine. No rush, she said. But the bank needs an answer by next Thursday. That was the last time I stepped foot in their house. A week later, Vera stopped calling. Nico stopped replying to texts. And one morning, I noticed a login attempt on my email from an unknown device. My bedroom door lock was scratched up. Nothing was stolen, but something felt off. I checked behind the lamp, then under the dresser. That's when I found it. A tiny black pinhole camera taped beneath the shelf facing my bed. It had a green, blinking light, no longer transmitting. I froze. Then I yanked it out of the wall and dropped it in a glass of water. I didn't scream. I didn't call the police. I called Vera. Was that supposed to scare me? I asked, voice even. There was a pause. Then she sighed like I had embarrassed her. A good daughter doesn't keep secrets, she said. Especially not in my house. I closed my eyes. My hand clenched around the phone. I'm not your house, I said. And I'm not yours. She hung up, and that was the end of pretending. I called Juno. She answered on the second ring. You said you know someone who understands privacy law, I asked. Yes, she said, and I think he's going to want to hear your story. After we hung up, I opened my laptop, created a new folder, titled it Legal Drafts. I began documenting everything, screenshots, copies of signed documents, Vera's messages, the photo of the camera. I timestamped everything. I wasn't scared anymore. I was just tired of pretending. That night, I double-checked the locks on my apartment 3 times, bolted the bottom one, placed a chair under the handle for good measure. Then I sat down on the couch, turned off all the lights, and waited. I wasn't sure who I was expecting, Dexter, Vera, some cheap scare tactic. But instead of fear, all I felt was readiness. Let them come. This time, I'd be ready. The voice didn't match the knock. I expected roughness. Maybe a demand, maybe Dexter's familiar bellow masked as authority, but instead, it was a woman's voice, smooth, practiced, a smile hidden in every syllable. Hi, Daisy. Sorry to drop by without calling. I opened the door an inch. Miss Boying-Thomason stood there, my high school English teacher, a scarf knotted neatly around her neck, holding a small paper bag like she was delivering cookies instead of decades-old confessions. I ran into Juno, she said softly. She told me you might want to talk. I let her in. Not because I was ready, but because something inside me needed to hear whatever this was. We sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd turned into a war desk. Papers, timelines, legal codes, and photos spread out like puzzle pieces I'd finally found the courage to sort through. She placed the bag down, but didn't open it. I remember you know, she started, fingers twisting her wedding ring around absent-mindedly. Not just as a student, but as someone I should have fought harder for. I didn't interrupt. I wanted her to keep talking before I gave her the chance to backpedal. I got an email once, she continued, from your mother. It was formal. She said you were struggling, that you had anxiety issues, and it would be better if you weren't placed in leadership roles, class president, yearbook editor, even the poetry team. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. She used the words emotionally unstable, said you needed fewer expectations so you wouldn't spiral. I looked down at my hands, nails digging slightly into my palms. She framed it as protective, she added quickly. She made it sound like she was advocating for you. Advocating, I repeated flatly. I believed her, Ms. Thomason admitted. I'm sorry. You deserved better. I nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, but I accepted the truth, and at least she came here to say it out loud. When she left, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I opened the folder labeled Evidence, added a new page, School Suppression via Fabricated Mental Health Claim. I included the approximate date and her name. This wasn't spite. This was accuracy. That night, while others were probably binging TV or scrolling their way to sleep, I pulled out a blank poster board and started my wall of reality. At the top, I pinned the scholarship letter Vera had hidden. To the left, my birth certificate with Dexter's name typed neatly where my father's should have been. Below that, a printout of the Facebook photo with the birthday cake that was meant for me. I added arrows, dates, red string connected one year to another like a conspiracy web. Except mine wasn't fiction. Mine bled. I wasn't unraveling. I was remembering. By midnight, the board was half filled. The apartment was still, lit only by the desk lamp and the soft glow of the fridge light I forgot to close. Then the phone rang. Not a call. A voicemail notification. It was Vera. I hit play and turned the speaker on low. Her voice poured through like syrup over glass, controlled, sweet in a way that made my skin prickle. You need to stop dragging people into this, Daisy. This is a family matter. What you're doing, it's unnecessary, hurtful. Think of Nico. Think of how all this looks. We're still your family, whether you like it or not. She paused, then added, Don't forget who raised you. I saved the message. I forwarded it to Malcolm. No response yet, but I knew he'd get it in the morning. He'd told me to document everything. The paper trail will always outlive the lies, he said. I returned to my desk and stared at the board. Then I added a printed transcript of the voicemail to the corner and labeled it, Emotional Leverage Masked as Concern. When the sun came up, I made coffee and started my journal entry for the day. A routine now. Grounding. Every entry began with the same line. Mom never hit me. She just deleted me. The pen hovered over the paper. Today I added, but I'm redrawing the outline. Later that afternoon, I opened a drawer in my desk that I rarely used. Inside, a stack of old notebooks. I was looking for one in particular, one I'd hidden even from myself. It was maroon, spiral-bound, with the word creative writing written in silver marker across the cover. From high school. I flipped through it slowly until I found the page I remembered. A letter. One I'd written, never mailed. Addressed to my father. It said, I don't know what's true anymore, but I remember your voice. I remember the way you let me press the elevator buttons when we went to the bank. I remember you always smelled like cedar. I hope that means something. I closed the notebook. It meant something now. That night, I sealed 2 envelopes. One, thick and heavy, with pages of the legal complaint I was ready to file. All the documentation, all the evidence. Labeled clearly for Malcolm to review. The second envelope was smaller, thinner, only 1 page inside. I wrote Nico's name on the front. Inside, the message was simple. I don't blame you, but I won't protect you either. You deserve the truth. So read it. Ask her yourself, and then decide who you are. I placed both envelopes on the table, side by side. Then I whispered, Let's see what truth does to a golden child. It was still early, not yet 9, when the mail truck rolled past my building. I stood by the window and watched as the carrier stepped out, slung her satchel over her shoulder, and made her rounds. I waited until she reached my building's mailboxes before slipping the envelope into the outgoing slot. No hesitation this time. The envelope was addressed to Nico. Inside, I'd placed 3 things: a certified copy of my original birth certificate, the one with my real father's name, James Harrison, a photo of the uncashed check from James's will that I'd found in Vera's drawer, and a short note in my handwriting that simply said, Ask her why she kept this from me. And from you. I stood there for a moment longer after the slot clinked shut. The morning was gray, still damp from last night's rain. Something about the coldness in the air made my skin feel raw, like it too was remembering. I hadn't thought about Nico much over the past few weeks. He wasn't the enemy, not really, but he wasn't innocent either. He'd benefited from the system Vera built, a system that erased me piece by piece while spotlighting him as the good one, the obedient one, the real child. But kids ask questions, and I remembered one in particular. I must have been 17. He was about 11, Chinese. We were sitting at the kitchen table playing 2 truths and a lie, something our English teacher had us do at the start of each semester. Just a silly game. Something to kill time. My turn, Nico had said, grinning. I have a dog. I hate spinach. I have pictures of my dad in every room of the house. I laughed. You don't hate spinach. You ate it yesterday. He laughed too, but then his expression changed slightly. Hey, Daisy, how come there aren't any pictures of your dad around? I remember the air tightening in my chest. I started to answer, but Vera came in just then, wiping her hands on a dish towel and said, Nico, go finish your math homework. Just like that, the question died. Now, years later, I was handing that question back to him, with evidence. I didn't expect a response right away, but I didn't have to wait long. By that afternoon, my phone buzzed. One new text. What is this? Why now? I stared at the words, reread them 3 times, and then replied, Because you deserve to know, and because you were used to. There was no reply after that. Hours passed. I didn't press. I didn't chase. Instead, I focused on the box that Juno had handed me earlier that day. She had stopped by after lunch, her coat still damp from the drizzle, and placed it gently on my table. A friend of your father's kept this, she said. He said it never felt right to throw it out. The box was unremarkable, just a plain brown cardboard shoebox, the corners taped. I peeled it open slowly. Inside, nestled in a crumpled grocery bag, was a cheap old flip phone. The screen was cracked, the battery swollen. It didn't power on, but tucked underneath it was a folded piece of paper, a typed log of text messages, printed, time-stamped. Sent over a span of 5 years, from James Harrison to my old number, messages I never received, dozens of them. My fingers trembled as I read, Your mother doesn't want me involved, but I'm trying. I miss you every day. Are you okay? I worry. I left something for you at the bank. Ask for the manager. Happy 18th. You're still my girl. By the time I reached the last one, dated just 6 months before he died, my vision was blurred. It read, I know I messed up, but I never stopped loving you. I sat down hard on the couch, the paper clutched in my hand. All that time, I thought he abandoned me. All that time, Vera had controlled what got through. She hadn't just rewritten my story, she intercepted the chapters. I walked outside, needing air, the pages folded in my jacket pocket. The clouds had thinned, but the wind carried the kind of chill that sneaks into your bones when you aren't looking. A few blocks away, I reached the park. It was quiet. Just a few early joggers, a couple walking their dog. I found an empty bench near the pond, sat down, and let it all wash over me. I cried, not the silent kind, the deep, shaking sobs that make your chest ache. I let my head fall into my hands. I didn't care who saw. She took everything. But as I sat there, wiping my face with the sleeve of my coat, I realized something. She didn't own what was left. What I still had. My voice, my truth, my memory. Those were mine. I would not give them up again. The wind picked up. I straightened my back and stared out across the water. By the time I returned home, it was nearly dusk. The streetlights were just starting to flicker on, casting soft golden halos on the sidewalk. I walked inside, set my bag down, and turned on my laptop. The screen glowed. I opened the folder labeled Legal, Drafts, a new document, title, Complaint, Draft 3, cursor blinking at the top. I began typing. Defendant, Vera Maddox. The courthouse didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like any tired building in Akron, slightly chipped brick, fluorescent lights too bright for early mornings, and hallways that smelled faintly of pine-scented cleaner and cold coffee. But that day, it was where I would draw the line. Malcolm was already waiting outside when Juno pulled up beside the curb and helped me out of the car. She didn't say much, just handed me a thermos of tea and gave my shoulder a quick squeeze. Malcolm nodded and walked us in through the glass doors. My hands gripped the evidence binder like a flotation device. The tabs poked out in bright colors, labeled Messages, Surveillance, Suppressed Records, Medical, and Witnesses. I had spent nights organizing it down to the minute. There was no backup plan. This was the plan. At the front desk, the clerk gave me a tired glance. Name? Daisy Marin, I said, steady. She found my paperwork. You're the plaintiff in this case? Yes. My voice didn't shake. Plaintiff, Daisy Marin. There it was, said out loud, written down, permanent. The filing process didn't take long, 20 minutes maybe, but the weight of it would echo for years. The petition for a restraining order against Dexter was straightforward. The injuries, the hospital records, the photographic evidence of the bruises, the neighbor's call to 911. It was airtight. The civil complaint against Vera, though, that was personal. Layered, intentional emotional harm, negligence, interference with educational opportunity, coercive control, psychological manipulation. It was a story most people wouldn't believe unless it came with proof. I had the proof. There was a brief pause when the clerk flipped through the materials, her brows lifting at one point. She didn't comment, just stamped it and handed it back. You'll be notified by mail when the hearing is set. Thank you. On the way out, Malcolm leaned toward me. You sure you're ready for the fallout? I didn't hesitate. She took everything but my name. I'm giving it back to myself. That afternoon, the process server delivered the documents to Vera's house. He'd been warned. She could be hostile, or worse, manipulative. But he reported back that she took them without a word, just opened the door, saw the envelope, and shut it again with trembling hands. The silence lasted 3 days. Then the letter arrived. No return address, just my name, handwritten in the familiar script I'd grown to hate. I opened it at the kitchen table, Juno sitting across from me. She had insisted on being there, just in case. I didn't argue. She poured 2 cups of coffee while I unfolded the paper. It wasn't an apology, not even close. You've always been dramatic, Daisy, it began. Your father said so too, back when we were married. You always saw pain where there was none, conflict where there was harmony. I stopped reading aloud, skimming instead, each sentence more venomous than the last. You've made a mess of everything, again, dragging strangers into our family, making accusations, spreading lies. You broke this family, congratulations. Juno was silent for a moment, then she said, She really mailed that with her whole chest, huh? I laughed. A bitter sound at first, then almost light. She thinks she's still the main character. I folded the letter and slipped it into the binder under psychological warfare. We didn't talk much after that. Juno stayed a little longer, helped me reorganize a few files. Before she left, she paused at the door. She'll probably try to spin this her way, she warned. I know, I said, but spin doesn't work when people already feel dizzy. And sure enough, the spinning began. 3 days later, I got a message from a woman named Patricia. I didn't recognize the number. But the message read, Hi Daisy, I used to work with your mother. I heard about what's happening. She told people it was just another one of your episodes, but she did the same thing to her sister years ago. Took over her finances, isolated her. You're not crazy. You're just done. I read the message twice, heart thudding, then responded simply, Thank you for telling me. She replied almost immediately, I wish someone had stopped her before. The floodgates opened after that. A friend of my father's sent an old voicemail she had saved, James's voice, soft and broken, saying, I don't know if she'll ever hear this, but tell Daisy I never wanted it to be this way. A neighbor from down the street who used to babysit me when I was little sent a message through Juno. Your mother used to tell people you were difficult, that you had a mean streak. I never saw that. I saw a kid who barely spoke. People were watching, and for once they were seeing clearly. The truth doesn't always scream, but when it's told right, it roars. Late one evening, I retrieved the mail from the hallway slot. Among the usual junk and bills was a plain white envelope. Inside was a single sheet, court hearing, June 14th, 9:00 a.m., Family Court, Room 206. I stared at the date, then walked to the kitchen, pulled a red marker from the drawer, and circled it on the calendar, bold, clear. Underneath, I wrote, My real birthday, because that was the day I would finally step out from under Vera's name and into my own. The courthouse was already busy by the time we arrived. Cars lined the street. People filtered through the security checkpoint with worn expressions and armfuls of paper. Some came for divorce hearings, custody battles, small claims. I came to reclaim my name. Juno parked the car in the lot across the street and turned off the ignition. Neither of us spoke for a moment. She reached for my hand, gave it one strong squeeze, then let go. Inside, Malcolm met us at the elevator, binder in hand. His tie was slightly crooked. He was always a little disheveled, like he'd been in a sprint just to exist. But he smiled when he saw me and nodded. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." We walked together through the double doors and into the courtroom. The room was quiet, cold, even though the sun had just started to warm the city after a week of clouds. I wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a gray blouse, black jeans, and the flats I'd saved for emergencies. Vera and Dexter were already seated at the defendant's table. She was dressed in soft pink, as if pastel could somehow soften the damage. Dexter sat rigidly beside her, jaw clenched, arms folded tight. There was one empty seat behind them. Nico wasn't coming. My name was called. I stood, walked forward, placed my right hand on the Bible, and took the stand. Malcolm approached the judge and introduced the case. Then it was my turn. I told them everything. I spoke clearly, calmly, like I was reading from a book I'd written. I spoke of the scholarship that vanished in Vera's desk drawer, next to receipts and fabric samples. I described the quiet dismissal from school opportunities, the replacement of my father's name with Dexter's on my birth certificate. I told them about the camera, tiny, black, and blinking, in my bedroom wall. About the boot against my ribs, the silence from my mother as I begged for help on the floor. "I wasn't just ignored," I said, locking eyes with Vera across the room. "I was deliberately removed." There was a pause, the kind that sinks into your skin and makes the room shrink. Vera's attorney stood. Older gentleman. Expensive suit. He approached slowly, with the air of someone preparing to deliver a lecture. "Ms. Marin," he began, "would you describe yourself as emotional?" "I'm human," I replied. He smiled like he'd been waiting for that answer. "Of course. But would you say you've ever exaggerated situations in the past? Seen events through a particularly sensitive lens?" Malcolm started to rise, but I stopped him with a glance. "I brought a binder," I said, calmly, "with receipts, screenshots, letters, witnesses. If I'm so emotional, why are you holding a folder full of proof?" His mouth opened, then closed. The judge motioned for Malcolm. He stepped forward and opened the binder to a specific section. Inside was the necklace, small, silver, with a charm shaped like a star. Vera had given it to me when I was a child, told me it was from her. "Your mother's love," she called it. Malcolm pulled out 2 documents. The first was a dated store receipt. The second, a letter from James Harrison, my real father. In it, he wrote, "I found the perfect gift for Daisy. Please give it to her. Tell her it's from Dad." The courtroom didn't gasp, but I saw Vera's face change. Just for a moment, a flicker of something between rage and defeat. I watched her eyes drift downward, refusing to meet mine again. The judge took her time before speaking. Her voice was even, deliberate. "This court finds the claims substantiated. Mr. Dexter Maddox is hereby subject to a 5-year restraining order, effective immediately. Ms. Vera Maddox will be held liable for emotional damages and compensatory restitution." She paused, then added, "This court recognizes a pattern of long-term psychological manipulation, deliberate obstruction of opportunity, and emotional coercion as outlined in the exhibits." It was done. Outside the courtroom, Malcolm shook my hand. "You did good," he said, voice low. Juno hugged me, hard. "You're free," she whispered. But freedom isn't instant. It unfolds slowly. Within 2 weeks, Dexter's business partner pulled out of their contract. Rumors spread. No one wanted to be associated with a man named in a civil suit for domestic abuse. Vera's job, an admin at a local dental practice, quietly let her go. Restructuring, they called it. But people talk. Akron isn't that big. One night, I opened my messages and found a text from Nico. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. I believe you." I stared at the words for a long time before responding. "Thank you. That matters." He didn't reply, but he didn't have to. The silence was enough. That Friday, I came home from work. Yes, I'd started again part-time, and found a box on my doorstep. No name, no label. Inside was a single envelope. A letter. From her. It wasn't an apology. I didn't expect one. You think this is over. It isn't. That was the entire message. I folded it once, twice, and placed it in the back of the same binder I brought to court. Then I locked the binder in a cabinet. Because to me, it was over. The war, at least, not the healing. 3 months had passed since the trial, and for the first time in what felt like years, I woke up and didn't flinch at the silence. It didn't feel hollow anymore. It wasn't laced with tension or filled with the echoes of words never said. It was just quiet, steady. Peaceful in the way that comes not with grand gestures or fireworks, but with the kind of stillness that settles like dust in a room that has finally stopped spinning. Like a neighbor you didn't notice moving in until one day you realized they'd been there all along, and they weren't leaving. That morning, I found myself standing at the front of a modest meeting room inside the Akron Community Center. It smelled faintly of lemon-scented disinfectant and burnt coffee from the metal carafes that had been reheated too many times. The linoleum floor was scuffed, the lighting too bright. Folding chairs were arranged in a loose semicircle, not quite even. There were 12 women in the room, all different, some older, some young. A few looked like they'd arrived out of curiosity. Others had that particular tightness in their shoulders that comes from knowing too much too soon. One woman sat clutching a tissue before anyone even said a word. Behind me, taped to the wall with painter's tape, was a banner I'd made from craft paper and a borrowed laminator. The letters were simple, uneven. Family isn't always blood. I turned to face them. "My name is Daisy," I said. A pause. No need to rush. I used to think survival meant silence. That if I just stayed small enough, quiet enough, obedient enough, things would fix themselves. But the truth is, silence doesn't heal. It hides. And what hides too long, rots. No gasps. No one clapped. But one woman in the back, her arms uncrossed. She leaned forward slightly, and that was enough. We talked for over an hour, not just me, them too. Their stories poured out in pieces, raw, unpolished, sometimes barely coherent, but honest. One woman spoke about her husband cutting off their daughter after she refused to pretend everything was fine. Another said her family labeled her dramatic because she stopped hosting Christmas after a breakdown they never acknowledged. One woman, soft-spoken and fierce, simply said, "I divorced my mother." When it ended, some women lingered to chat quietly, others slipped out, offering soft smiles on their way to the door. I stayed behind, folding the chairs slowly, carefully. Still mindful of the old hip injury, healed but not forgotten. The cold made it flare up. But today, it didn't hurt as much. That's when I saw her. A girl, maybe 16, 17. Standing near the exit, arms tucked into the sleeves of an oversized sweatshirt, chin low, eyes darting around the room like she wasn't sure if she belonged. I recognized that posture. I'd worn it once myself, rigid, protective. The armor of someone who's been told over and over that they're too much, too emotional, too inconvenient. I walked over slowly. "You okay?" I asked gently. She nodded, barely. Then, so softly I almost missed it, she whispered, "I still live with her." That was all she said, but I knew who her was. I reached up to the necklace I wore every day, a simple silver chain, nothing flashy. It had once been a gift, something Vera had given me years ago, claiming it was hers to give. I later found out it had been my father's, the only thing of his I'd ever worn. I unclasped it and held it out to her. "Here," I said. "You don't have to keep it forever, just until you're ready to let go of her." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just nodded and took it, like it meant something more than jewelry, and maybe it did. That night, I sat on my couch, legs tucked beneath me, warm mug in hand. The sun had long since dipped behind the city skyline. The room glowed with low lamps and the soft hum of something familiar on the TV. I checked my phone before bed and saw a message from Juno. "You saved more than yourself," it said. "You redefined what family means, for all of us." I stared at her words for a long moment, then typed back, "I guess I'm not the last broken girl." Somewhere across town, I imagined Vera in the same armchair she always used, the one in the corner of the living room, once decorated with throw pillows and perfectly curated lighting. Now, it sagged under years of use and silence. She probably had the TV on, muted. Maybe she reached for the day's mail with her chipped manicure, sorted through bills and flyers, and found the small postcard announcing the next workshop. Maybe she scoffed. Maybe she read it twice. I'll never know. But sometimes I like to imagine she folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. Maybe even the same drawer that holds the unopened letter from my father, the one she claimed never came. And maybe, just maybe, every time she opens that drawer, something inside her twists, not out of revenge, just consequence. A week later, the frost had just begun to lift from the sidewalks when I returned to the park. Same bench, same pond. The geese were louder than I remembered, and someone had left breadcrumbs by the edge. I sat down and pulled out my journal. It was nearly full now, every page stained with ink and memory, scribbles of grief and recovery, confusion and clarity. I flipped to the last page, on it, in my own hand. "You don't need an apology to move forward, just proof you lived through it." I carefully tore it out, folded it, delicately, into a paper crane. I wasn't great at origami, but I had practiced this one. I held the crane in my palms for a moment. Then I let the breeze carry it. It lifted, fluttered, caught the air, spun in a graceful arc before it sailed toward the pond and landed near the water's edge. I stayed there for a while. No audience, no grand catharsis, just breath, just space, just life, inching forward. I closed my eyes for a moment, then spoke aloud. To the trees, to the wind, to whoever was listening. I didn't get the sorry. Another breath. I didn't need the sorry. A pause. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy. And then, a smile, quiet, earned. And now, I know. Sometimes, the deepest wounds come not from strangers, but from the people who share your last name. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by your own family, let this story remind you, silence doesn't protect you, truth does. And healing doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop waiting for one. What would you do if your own mother stood by while someone broke you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories that speak the unspoken.